A young millionaire flash-married a homeless girl to avoid a forced marriage, unaware of who she really was. And the truth changed their lives forever. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The winter wind howled through the concrete canyons of Manhattan, carrying a chill that sliced through even the thickest coats. Alexander Reed walked briskly, hands buried deep in the pockets of his tailored overcoat. But the cold wasn't what troubled him. His father's ultimatum echoed in his mind, a hammer striking an anvil: marry Melissa Harrington or lose his stake in the Reed financial empire. The weight of tradition, the suffocating grip of expectations, left him on the verge of unraveling. He turned onto a quieter street, his polished shoes crunching over patches of frost. The city's neon glow softened in the nearby park, where darkness wrapped itself around the skeletal trees. Alexander, a man of precision and control, found himself drawn to the unpredictable quiet. He paused near a bench, catching sight of a bundle of plastic and blankets. Someone sleeping there, huddled against the elements. It was a woman. Her auburn hair spilled out from under a knit cap, and though her coat was frayed and ill-fitted, there was an elegance in how she clutched her few belongings. Alexander hesitated, unsure why he didn't just keep walking. Then her eyes opened, bright, piercing, and far more alert than he expected. "Are you just going to stand there?" she asked, her voice steady despite her predicament. "Or are you one of those do-gooders with a spare coffee and a lecture about life choices?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Neither," he said. "Just passing by." She sat up slightly, adjusting her makeshift shelter. "Well, congratulations. You've passed." There was a sharpness to her tone, but Alexander detected something else beneath it: defiance, perhaps even wit. He shifted his weight. "Do you always greet strangers like this?" "Only the ones staring at me like I'm an exhibit," she shot back. Her gaze softened for a moment, and she studied him. "Nice coat. Let me guess, Wall Street." "Something like that." He smirked, but the edge in her voice stayed with him. "I didn't mean to intrude. Just needed some air." She shrugged and looked away, as if to dismiss him. "Air's free. For now, anyway." Alexander stepped closer, curiosity piqued. "What's your name?" "Emma," she replied, her eyes narrowing. "And yours?" "Alexander," he said, offering a small nod. "Do you always sleep here?" "Do you always interrogate strangers in parks?" she countered, folding her arms. Her coat couldn't hide the fact that she was trembling slightly from the cold. "I'm fine. You can go back to whatever fancy dinner you're skipping." He hesitated, torn between propriety and a strange pull to stay. Emma's bluntness was a stark contrast to the polished, calculated interactions he was used to. "You're not fine," he said, surprising himself with the bluntness of his own words. "You shouldn't have to be here." Her laughter was low and bitter. "And what would you know about shouldn't, Mr. Alexander? People like me don't end up here because we choose to." Something in her words stung, and Alexander realized he didn't have a good answer. Instead, he asked, "How long?" She raised an eyebrow. "How long what? How long have you been on the streets?" Emma leaned back against the bench, her breath visible in the cold air. "Long enough," she said simply, avoiding his gaze. "But I get by." There was an edge of pride in her voice that caught him off guard. Here was someone who had lost everything, or nearly everything, and yet hadn't crumbled. Alexander's world, in contrast, was defined by abundance, yet he felt more trapped than ever. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to." "Pity me," she interjected, her eyes flashing. "Save it. People like you only show up to feel better about yourselves." I wasn't, he began, but stopped. Maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. Maybe he had stopped because her presence made his own problems seem trivial by comparison. But there was something more. She intrigued him. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. Emma shifted, adjusting her blankets again. "Look," she said finally, her tone softer. "If you're going to stand here and chat, at least make yourself useful. There's a coffee shop down the block. Black, no sugar." A startled laugh escaped him. "Bossy, aren't you?" She smirked faintly, the corners of her mouth barely lifting. "Efficient. Go on, Wall Street." For reasons he didn't fully understand, Alexander turned and walked toward the coffee shop she'd pointed out. The brisk air cleared his mind slightly, but the knot in his chest remained. He ordered the coffee and returned, handing it to her without a word. Emma took it, cradling the cup in her hands. "Thanks," she said, almost grudgingly. Then, after a pause, "So, what's your deal? You don't exactly scream Good Samaritan." Alexander sat down on the far end of the bench, the cold wood biting through his coat. "Let's just say I needed some perspective." She studied him over the rim of the cup. "And did you find it?" He looked out at the barren trees and the distant lights of the city. "I think I might have," he said quietly, glancing at her. Emma didn't reply, but her expression softened, just slightly. They sat there in silence, two strangers sharing the weight of their separate worlds. The grey morning light seeped through the skeletal branches of the park's trees, casting a cold glow over the bench where Alexander sat. He hadn't slept, his mind turning over the events of the previous evening like a puzzle missing its corner pieces. Beside him, Emma dozed lightly, her head propped awkwardly against the wooden slats. The plastic sheeting she'd used as a shield from the elements fluttered in the light breeze. He had intended to leave her there, to walk away and let her life resume without interference. Yet, as the city stirred to life, the idea he'd been toying with all night solidified into something uncomfortably tangible. Emma shifted, her breath visible in the crisp air, and opened her eyes, blinking against the light. "You're still here," she said, her voice thick with grogginess. "Most people disappear by now." Alexander's lips twitched into a faint smile. "I suppose I'm not most people." Emma snorted softly, pulling her coat tighter around herself. "Clearly. So, what's the excuse this time? Existential crisis? Need another dose of perspective?" "No." His tone was serious enough to make her pause. "I came to ask you something." Her brow furrowed as she studied him. "Ask me something." "Let me guess, you want me to tell you my sob story so you can feel better about your charmed existence, sir?" Alexander exhaled, the breath forming a plume in the cold air. "No, I want to make you an offer." Emma's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering in her gaze. "An offer? What kind of offer?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly. "A marriage." For a moment, the sounds of the city, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, seemed to fall away. Emma stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief, before bursting into laughter. It was sharp, almost mocking, and she doubled over, clutching her sides. "Wow," she said between breaths, "that's a new one. Marriage proposals from strangers on park benches. What's next? A reality show?" "I'm serious," Alexander said, his voice steady but low, the edge of desperation unmistakable. Emma's laughter faltered, and she straightened, her expression shifting to one of guarded curiosity. "You're serious," she echoed, as if tasting the words for the first time. "Okay, let's hear it. Why on earth would a guy like you want to marry someone like me?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "It's complicated." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Complicated? That's the best you've got. I need to avoid a marriage." Alexander admitted, the words spilling out faster than he intended. An arranged one. My father's trying to force me into it to secure some merger or alliance. I don't know, but I can't let it happen. Her skepticism deepened. So what? You thought, hey, that homeless woman looks like wife material. It's not like that, he said sharply, then softened his tone. You seemed different, unpredictable, and last night, when we talked, it was the first honest conversation I've had in months, maybe years. Emma stared at him, her expression unreadable. And what's in it for me? Alexander straightened, drawing a steadying breath. A chance to get off the streets, a place to live, financial stability, whatever you need to get your life back on track. No strings attached. Once my father backs off, we can annul it. Emma leaned back, crossing her arms. So I'm supposed to sell myself into your soap opera of a life for a warm bed and a paycheck. Sounds like a dream. It's not like that, he repeated. I'm offering you a way out, and, frankly, I don't have many other options. She tilted her head, studying him intently. You don't seem like the kind of guy who's used to not getting what he wants. Why me? Alexander met her gaze. Because you don't want anything from me. Not my money, not my influence. And because I think you'd be honest with me, even if it's not what I want to hear. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked away, her gaze settling on the horizon. For a long moment, she said nothing, the silence stretching between them. I don't trust you, Emma said finally, her voice quiet but firm. This whole thing sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. I get it, Alexander said, but think about it. What do you have to lose? Emma's eyes flashed back to his, sharp and unyielding. A lot more than you think. They sat in silence again, the weight of his proposal settling heavily between them. Alexander resisted the urge to press her further, sensing that any additional words would only push her further away. Finally, Emma stood, gathering her belongings with swift, deliberate movements. I need time, she said, slinging her tattered bag over her shoulder. To think. Take all the time you need, Alexander said, standing as well, but don't wait too long. I don't have much time left. Emma paused, her back to him, then glanced over her shoulder. You really are desperate, aren't you? Alexander gave her a rueful smile. You have no idea. She shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips despite herself. You're crazy, you know that. Maybe, he said, but sometimes crazy is what works. Without another word, Emma walked away, her figure disappearing into the morning fog. Alexander remained where he was, staring after her, the weight of what he had just done pressing heavily on his chest. The hours since Emma had walked away felt like days. Alexander sat alone in his office, a sleek space on the 40th floor of a midtown skyscraper. The city sprawled below him, bustling with energy and indifference. His assistant had already buzzed twice, reminding him of meetings he had no interest in attending. For once, the minutiae of corporate deals felt small compared to the storm brewing in his personal life. Emma's hesitation lingered in his mind. He'd thought she might dismiss him outright or laugh off the absurdity of his proposal. But her pause, that spark of consideration, told him she was weighing the idea, and that kept him restless. He replayed their conversation, analyzing every word, every expression, searching for signs of hope or defeat. Emma, meanwhile, wandered through the streets of Manhattan, the city's familiar chaos, failing to soothe her as it usually did. She ducked into a library, one of the few places she could find warmth without suspicion. The cavernous reading room welcomed her with its quiet dignity, and she settled into a corner seat, her bag tucked safely under the table. She pulled out a battered notebook, its pages filled with tiny, hurried handwriting. Each word was a fragment of her life, her dreams, her failures, her attempts to make sense of the world since losing everything. She flipped to an empty page, pen poised, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, Alexander's face hovered in her thoughts, his earnest expression as he'd made that insane proposition. "Marry me," he'd said, as if it were the most logical solution in the world. And the worst part, a part of her wanted to say yes. Her pen scratched against the paper as she wrote, "What happens when you've run out of reasons to say no?" She stared at the sentence, the weight of it pressing down on her. Her life had been a long series of battles, some won, most lost. But this offer felt like a crossroads she hadn't anticipated. Could she trust him? More importantly, could she trust herself not to lose what little she had left in the process? Her thoughts were interrupted by the low murmur of voices nearby. Two women sat a few tables away, their conversation drifting through the quiet. "Sometimes you have to take a chance, you know? It's scary, but staying in the same place is scarier." Emma smirked at the irony, but couldn't shake the truth of the words. Was she staying put because it was safer, or because it was easier to believe that safety didn't exist anymore? Back in his office, Alexander paced, his frustration mounting. He grabbed his phone, scrolling to Emma's number, which he'd saved after their last encounter. His thumb hovered over the call button. What would he even say? "Hey, have you decided to uproot your life and save mine yet?" He threw the phone onto the desk, running a hand through his hair. The sound of his office door opening made him turn sharply. It was Richard Reed, his father, stepping in without so much as a knock. "Alexander," Richard began, his tone clipped. "I've just come from a meeting with Harrington. They're expecting an announcement by next week." Alexander bristled. "I told you, I'm not going through with it." "And I told you," Richard countered, his voice rising. "This isn't about what you want. It's about the company, about the family legacy. You can't throw that away because you've decided to play rebel billionaire." "This isn't rebellion," Alexander said coldly. "It's my life." Richard's lips curled into a thin smile, the kind that always made Alexander feel 10 years old again. "You think this is your life. Everything you have, everything you are, comes from the decisions I've made for you. Remember that before you destroy it all over some childish fantasy." Alexander's fists clenched at his sides. "I won't marry someone I don't love." "Love," Richard scoffed, his laughter devoid of warmth. "You think love matters in a merger like this? Grow up, Alexander. Love is a luxury, one we can't afford right now." The words hung in the air long after Richard left. Alexander sank into his chair, feeling the walls of his world close in tighter. His father's parting shot echoed in his mind, cruel but true. "Everything you have comes from me." For Emma, the day stretched into evening as she roamed the city. She found herself standing before the park bench where she'd first met Alexander. It was empty now, the plastic sheet she'd left behind fluttering on the ground. She picked it up absently, her thoughts circling like vultures. What if this was her chance? A way out, a fresh start, if only for a little while. But at what cost? She thought of the years she'd spent clawing her way through survival, holding tight to her independence as her last shred of dignity. Could she trade that for the uncertainty of his world? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She pulled it out, staring at the unknown number on the screen. For a long moment, she considered letting it ring. Then, with a sigh, she answered, "Emma!" Alexander's voice came through, tense but steady. "I know I said you could take your time, but I need to know if you're considering it." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the phone. "I don't know." "That's not a no," he said quickly, and she could almost hear the relief in his voice. "Meet me tomorrow. Let's talk about this properly." Emma closed her eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. "All right," she said finally. Tomorrow. As she hung up, the city's lights blurred around her. For the first time in years, Emma wasn't sure if she was running towards something or away from it. Alexander waited at the cafe he'd suggested, its interior alive with the low hum of conversation and the faint clatter of cups and cutlery. He sat near the window, his untouched espresso cooling in its porcelain cup. His leg bounced under the table, a rare display of nerves. He wasn't accustomed to waiting, certainly not for someone like Emma, whose life seemed worlds away from his. Yet here he was, hoping she'd show up and agree to his mad plan. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and Alexander's eyes darted up. Emma stepped in, scanning the room with a guarded expression. Her patched coat and scuffed boots stood out among the polished patrons, but she walked with a quiet confidence, her chin held high. When her eyes met his, she hesitated for a fraction of a second before making her way over. "You're early," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "You're late," Alexander countered, though his tone was more teasing than accusatory. Emma smirked faintly, unzipping her coat and shrugging it off. "I guess I needed the extra 5 minutes to convince myself this isn't a terrible idea." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "And did you?" Her smirk faded, replaced by a seriousness that made her seem older, wearier. "I'm here, aren't I?" A waiter appeared, and Emma ordered tea. Her tone clipped. Alexander noticed the way she held herself, tense and alert, as though ready to flee at the slightest provocation. He couldn't blame her. He had no idea how he'd react if their positions were reversed. "So," she said once the waiter left, "let's hear it, the whole thing. No vague promises or half-baked ideas. If I'm going to think about saying yes, I need to know exactly what I'm getting into." Alexander leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "It's simple. We get married. Just on paper. I'll handle everything, the paperwork, the logistics, even the ceremony if it comes to that. You'll have a place to live, financial support, and complete freedom to do what you want once this is over. All I need is for my father to believe it's real long enough to get him off my back." Emma studied him, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of his expression, his posture. "And what happens when he finds out it's a sham? What happens to me then?" "He won't," Alexander said firmly. "He's not the type to dig too deeply once things go his way. As long as we play our roles convincingly, he'll move on to his next power play." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "You're putting a lot of faith in someone who sounds like a professional manipulator." Alexander's jaw tightened. "He is, but I know how he operates." Emma took a sip of her tea, her gaze never leaving his. "And what about you? What's your endgame? You're risking a lot for someone you barely know." "It's not about risk," Alexander said quietly. "It's about control. For once in my life, I want to make a decision that's mine, not his." Emma leaned back, tapping her fingers on the edge of the table. "You sound like someone with everything to lose." "And you sound like someone with nothing left to lose," he said, his tone softer than she expected. Her fingers stilled, and she looked away, her expression unreadable. The truth of his words lingered between them, heavy and undeniable. "You'd have to follow some rules," Alexander added after a pause. "My father is perceptive. If he senses something's off, it'll all fall apart." Emma snorted. "Rules. Great. I'm already loving this marriage." "It won't be forever," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "A year at most." Her laugh was bitter. "You say that like a year isn't a lifetime." Alexander hesitated, unsure how to respond. He could see the cracks beneath her defiance, the weight she carried. "If you want to say no," he said finally, "I'll understand." Emma stared at him for a long moment, her tea forgotten. "I'm not saying no," she said quietly, But I'm not saying yes either, not yet. Relief and frustration warred within him, but he nodded. Fair enough. She glanced around the cafe, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. Your world. It's not mine. You know that, right? I do, he said, but maybe that's why this could work. Emma's lips twitched into a faint, humorless smile. We'll see. Before Alexander could respond, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and grimaced. It's my father. I need to take this. Emma nodded, watching as he stepped outside, his expression darkening as he answered the call. She couldn't hear the conversation, but the tension in his body was evident. When he returned, his jaw was set, his eyes hard. What did he say? Emma asked, her voice cautious. Alexander sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. He's pushing up the timeline. If I don't make an announcement by the end of the month, he'll cut me off. Emma raised an eyebrow. Cut you off from what? The private jets and the art collections. It's not about the money, he snapped, then softened. It's about the principle. He's been pulling my strings for too long. She studied him, her expression thoughtful. You really hate him, don't you? Alexander shook his head. It's not hate, it's disappointment. Emma sipped her tea, her gaze steady. Disappointment can be worse. They sat in silence, the noise of the cafe fading into the background. For the first time, Alexander felt like someone understood, not just his predicament, but the quiet ache beneath it. I'll think about it, Emma said finally, her voice steady. But if I do this, it's on my terms. No surprises. Agreed, Alexander said, extending his hand. Partners? She stared at his hand for a moment before shaking it. Partners. Emma stood on the threshold of the courthouse, staring up at its imposing stone facade. The world around her felt surreal, as though she were floating in someone else's life. Alexander was at her side, impeccably dressed as always, his tailored suit cutting a sharp silhouette against the grey January sky. He exuded calm confidence, though Emma had caught the way his jaw tightened as they approached. Last chance to back out, Alexander said, breaking the silence. His tone was light, but there was a tension in his voice, an unspoken hope, or fear, that she'd change her mind. Emma adjusted the collar of the borrowed coat she wore, a gift from Alexander to replace her threadbare one. It was warm and well-fitted, but wearing it made her feel like an imposter. I've already signed the papers, she said. Backing out now would just make me look indecisive. His mouth quirked into a faint smile, and we wouldn't want that. The automatic doors whooshed open, and Emma stepped inside, her heartbeat quickening. The courthouse lobby was busy, filled with the low murmur of voices and the occasional echo of heels on the polished tile floor. It smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, a sterile reminder of the bureaucracy that governed their next steps. Alexander led the way to a small office where a clerk waited, her expression bored but polite. She gestured for them to sit, barely glancing at the documents Alexander handed over. As the clerk flipped through the forms, Emma's eyes wandered to a framed photo on the desk, a family portrait, the clerk beaming with her children and husband. It was the kind of image Emma had stopped imagining for herself a long time ago. Everything looks in order, the clerk said, sliding the documents back across the desk. You're scheduled with Judge Whitman in 15 minutes, courtroom 3B. Thank you, Alexander said, rising smoothly. Emma followed, her legs feeling like lead. They found the courtroom easily, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was quieter, heavier. A judge sat at the front, flipping through a file, his glasses perched low on his nose. Alexander and Emma sat on the bench closest to the front, the silence between them now punctuated by the occasional scratch of the judge's pen. You're unusually quiet, Alexander said softly, leaning closer. His tone was calm, but there was curiosity in his eyes. Emma shrugged, her fingers twisting in her lap. What do you want me to say? This isn't exactly a normal day for me. It's not normal for me either, he admitted, surprising her. But here we are. Before she could respond, the judge looked up. Mr. Reed and Ms. Taylor. That's us, Alexander said, standing. He extended a hand to Emma, who hesitated before taking it, allowing him to pull her to her feet. The gesture felt oddly intimate, though she reminded herself that it wasn't. Not really. The judge motioned for them to approach. His gaze was sharp but not unkind, his eyes flicking between the two of them with practiced scrutiny. You understand the terms of this agreement, that marriage, even a civil union such as this, carries legal and social obligations. Yes, Your Honor, Alexander said with practiced ease. Emma nodded, her throat dry. I understand. The judge glanced at the forms in front of him. It's unusual to process something like this so quickly. Are there mitigating circumstances I should be aware of? My father, Alexander said bluntly. The judge arched an eyebrow, and Alexander continued, Let's just say there's pressure from certain family interests. This arrangement is mutually beneficial. The judge's lips twitched, as though suppressing a smile. Mutually beneficial, he echoed. Well, I've seen worse reasons. The rest of the proceedings passed in a blur. The judge recited the required formalities, and Emma found herself repeating vows that felt hollow in her mouth, like reciting lines in a play. Alexander, however, spoke with steady conviction, his voice clear and strong. She wondered if it was a talent honed in boardrooms, or if he genuinely believed in the importance of appearances, even here. When it was over, the judge stamped the documents with a loud thud and handed them back to Alexander. Congratulations, he said, though his tone was more perfunctory than celebratory. Thank you, Your Honor, Alexander replied, shaking the man's hand. Emma followed Alexander out of the courtroom, her thoughts a whirlwind. As they stepped back into the cold January air, Alexander glanced at her. You look pale. I just married a stranger in a courthouse, she said dryly. Pale seems like the least of my worries. He chuckled, his first genuine laugh since she'd met him. Fair point. They walked in silence for a few minutes, the city bustling around them. Emma tucked her hands into the pockets of her coat, savoring its warmth even as her mind churned with doubts. So, what now? Alexander stopped, turning to face her. Now, you move into the penthouse. We let my father see us together. We make it look real. And then, she pressed, and then we see how good we are at pretending, he said, his gaze steady. This isn't just about me, Emma. If you're in, we're in this together. For the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, and it startled her. This man, who seemed so composed, was just as unsure as she was. She nodded, the weight of their unspoken agreement settling heavily between them. Together, she said, though the word felt foreign on her tongue. And as they hailed a cab, Emma couldn't help but wonder if this leap into the unknown would break her or finally set her free. The elevator ascended smoothly to the top floor, its polished interior reflecting Emma's uneasy expression. She clutched her bag, a frayed relic of her life on the streets, like a shield, her fingers curling tightly around the worn strap. Alexander stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, the picture of calm composure. If he noticed her nerves, he said nothing, but the silence between them was heavy. When the elevator doors opened, Emma was greeted by the sheer opulence of Alexander's penthouse. The space stretched wide and open, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Manhattan. The furnishings were modern and sleek, all clean lines and muted tones, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the city below. This is a lot, Emma murmured, stepping inside cautiously, as though afraid her presence might tarnish the pristine surroundings. Alexander smiled faintly, setting his coat on a nearby chair. "It takes some getting used to." Emma lingered near the doorway, reluctant to move further. "You live here alone?" He nodded, walking toward the bar. "I've always preferred my own space. Drink?" She shook her head, her fingers still gripping her bag. "I don't drink much." "Suit yourself." He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid glinting in the light. Turning back to her, he gestured to the room. "You don't have to act like a guest, you know. This is your home now, too." Emma's laugh was soft, almost bitter. "Home," she echoed, the word heavy with disbelief. "I don't even know what that means anymore." Alexander studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Come on, I'll show you your room." She followed him down a wide hallway, the walls adorned with understated art that likely cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. At the end of the corridor, he pushed open a door to reveal a bedroom that was as luxurious as the rest of the penthouse. The bed was massive, dressed in crisp white linens, and the furniture was sleek and minimalist. "This is yours," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. "I had some things brought in, clothes, toiletries. If there's anything else you need, just let me know." Emma stood in the center of the room, feeling small and out of place. She set her bag down at the foot of the bed, her fingers brushing over the smooth fabric of the comforter. "It's too much. It's what's necessary," Alexander said simply. "You'll need to look the part if we're going to convince my father." She turned to face him, crossing her arms. "And what part is that exactly?" "My wife," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Confident, poised, someone who belongs here." Emma snorted softly, shaking her head. "You might have chosen the wrong person for this job." He stepped closer, his expression softening. "You're smarter than half the people who live in this world, and you've survived more than most of them ever will. Don't underestimate yourself." For a moment, Emma was caught off guard by his words. They didn't feel like flattery. There was a sincerity in his voice that unsettled her. She looked away, her gaze falling on the window overlooking the city. "Fine," she said finally. "But I'm not turning into one of them. I don't care how much money you have. I'm not playing pretend beyond what's necessary." Alexander's lips quirked into a small smile. "Fair enough." He turned to leave but paused in the doorway. "Dinner's at 7. Formal, unfortunately. My father expects appearances to be maintained." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Tonight, that's short notice." "You'll manage," he said with a faint smirk. "I have a feeling you're good under pressure." Hours later, Emma stood in front of a mirror in her room, staring at the stranger looking back at her. The dress Alexander had arranged for her, a sleek black gown that fit perfectly despite her protests, was unlike anything she'd ever worn. Her hair, styled by a professional who had shown up unannounced, was swept back elegantly, and her makeup was subtle but polished. She felt ridiculous, like a fraud. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, Alexander stood there, dressed in a sharp tuxedo. For a moment, they both paused, taking each other in. "You clean up well," he said, his tone laced with genuine admiration. Emma rolled her eyes, though a faint blush crept into her cheeks. "This feels like a scene from a bad movie." He chuckled, stepping back to let her out. "Let's hope my father doesn't see it that way." The dining room was just as grand as the rest of the penthouse, with a long table set for 4. Richard Reed was already there, his imposing presence filling the room. Beside him sat Melissa Harrington, the woman Alexander had been meant to marry. She was stunning and composed, her icy demeanor a sharp contrast to Emma's unease. "Father," Alexander said smoothly as they entered. "Melissa," Richard's eyes narrowed as they fell on Emma. "So, this is the woman who's stolen my son's attention." Emma forced herself to meet his gaze, her chin lifting slightly. "And you must be the man who thinks he knows what's best for everyone else." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Then, to her surprise, Richard's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Well, you're not afraid to speak your mind. I'll give you that." Melissa, however, was less amused, her icy gaze sweeping over Emma with clear disdain. "This should be interesting," she murmured, her tone dripping with condescension. Emma held her ground, determined not to let their judgment rattle her. As she took her seat beside Alexander, she felt his hand briefly brush hers under the table, a small gesture of reassurance. For better or worse, the game had begun. Emma woke the next morning to sunlight spilling through the sheer curtains of her room. The unfamiliar luxury of the bed still felt foreign, as though she didn't belong in its embrace. Her first instinct was to reach for the small notebook she always kept close, but it wasn't there, tucked somewhere deep in her bag, where she hadn't touched it since moving in. Instead, she sat up and stared at the sprawling view of Manhattan, the city both alluring and indifferent to her presence. The previous night's dinner still sat heavily in her mind. Richard Reed's calculated questions and Melissa Harrington's icy demeanor had made every bite feel like a test. Alexander, ever composed, had deftly deflected his father's probing inquiries. But Emma could sense the undercurrent of tension. They were being watched, evaluated, and any misstep could spell disaster. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. The door opened to reveal Grace, the penthouse's housekeeper. She was a woman in her mid-50s, her grey hair pulled back into a neat bun. Her warm eyes crinkled as she offered Emma a small smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Reed," Grace said, carrying a tray with coffee and a croissant. Emma flinched at the title, the weight of it settling uncomfortably on her shoulders. "Please, just Emma," she said, standing to take the tray. "Thank you." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "As you wish." "Emma, Mr. Reed asked me to let you know he'll be working from the study this morning. He said you're welcome to join him, if you'd like." Emma raised an eyebrow. "And what if I'd rather avoid him?" Grace's smile widened slightly. "Then I suppose you're free to explore the rest of the penthouse. It's large enough to get lost in, though I wouldn't recommend the wine cellar unless you're prepared to stay a while." Emma chuckled despite herself. "Thanks for the warning." As Grace left, Emma sat by the window and nibbled on the croissant, her thoughts swirling. Alexander had said they needed to present a united front, but the idea of stepping into his world felt overwhelming. Still, she wasn't about to hide in her room like a frightened child. If she was going to play this role, she needed to do it on her terms. Emma found Alexander in the study, a grand room with dark wood paneling and shelves filled with books she doubted he'd ever read. He sat at a massive desk, his brow furrowed as he scrolled through something on his laptop. The light streaming through the windows highlighted the tension in his features, a sharp contrast to his usual polished exterior. "Am I interrupting?" she asked, lingering in the doorway. He looked up, his expression softening slightly. "Not at all. Come in." Emma stepped inside, her gaze wandering over the room. "You look like you've been up for hours." "Comes with the territory," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Dealing with my father isn't exactly a 9-to-5 job." Emma crossed her arms, leaning against the edge of the desk. "You didn't say much at dinner last night. What's the real deal with Melissa?" Alexander's lips pressed into a thin line. "Melissa's a pawn, just like me. Her father runs a company my father wants to merge with ours. The marriage was supposed to seal the deal, but I refused." Emma studied him, her sharp eyes catching the flicker of guilt in his expression. "And now you're using me to get out of it." His gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. "I never pretended otherwise." She appreciated his honesty, even if it didn't make her situation any easier. Melissa doesn't seem like the forgiving type. She's not, Alexander admitted, but she's also pragmatic. As long as she gets what she wants in the end, she won't cause trouble. Emma raised an eyebrow. And what does she want? To be on top, he said simply, in every way that matters. Emma shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Your world is exhausting. You're not wrong, Alexander said, standing and walking to the window. He stared out at the city for a moment before turning back to her. But you're part of it now, whether you like it or not. Emma opened her mouth to respond, but the door to the study opened again, and Grace stepped inside. Mr. Reed, you have a visitor. Alexander frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. It's Melissa Harrington, Grace said, her tone carefully neutral. She insists it's urgent. Emma's stomach sank, but she forced herself to stay calm. Perfect timing. Alexander glanced at her, his expression a mix of concern and determination. Stay. This affects both of us. Melissa entered a moment later, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She was dressed impeccably, as always, her icy demeanor unwavering. Her gaze swept over Emma briefly before settling on Alexander. We need to talk, she said, her tone clipped. By all means, Alexander said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. What's so urgent? Melissa sat gracefully, crossing her legs. Your father's not happy, Alexander. He doesn't believe for a second that this marriage is real. Emma tensed, but Alexander remained calm. My father doesn't believe in anything that doesn't serve his interests. That's not news. Melissa's gaze flicked to Emma, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. And you're willing to risk everything on her? A woman with no pedigree, no connections. Emma bristled but kept her composure. Last I checked, I didn't need your approval. Melissa's smile widened slightly. Feisty. I can see why he chose you. Enough, Alexander said sharply, his voice cutting through the tension. My decisions are none of your concern, Melissa. If you're here to deliver one of my father's messages, tell him this: I'm not backing down. Melissa rose, her expression as cool as ever. Don't say I didn't warn you. As she left, the room fell silent. Emma exhaled slowly, the weight of the encounter settling over her. Alexander turned to her, his expression grim. Welcome to my world, he said quietly. Emma met his gaze, her resolve hardening. I can handle it, but you'd better be sure you can too. Emma wasn't sure why she had agreed to accompany Alexander to the charity gala. The thought of stepping into a room filled with the elite of Manhattan made her stomach churn, but his insistence had worn her down. This is about appearances, he had said, his tone as steady as the suit he'd selected for the event. If my father doesn't see us together in public, it'll all fall apart. Now she found herself walking into a grand ballroom draped in shimmering gold and white, every detail meticulously crafted to scream wealth and exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm glow over the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. Emma's dress, another selection from the seemingly endless wardrobe Alexander had provided, hugged her figure in ways she wasn't used to. The deep emerald color made her feel exposed, but Alexander had assured her it was perfect. Just stay close, Alexander murmured as they entered, his hand lightly brushing the small of her back. The gesture was fleeting but grounding, a reminder that they were in this together, or at least pretending to be. The room was a cacophony of polite laughter and murmured conversations, punctuated by the occasional clink of glasses. Emma felt their eyes on her, curious and scrutinizing, as if her presence here disrupted the delicate balance of their carefully curated world. She kept her head high, mimicking the posture of the women around her, though inside she felt like a child playing dress-up. Alexander, came a voice, smooth and familiar. Richard Reed approached, his presence as commanding as ever. Beside him was a woman Emma hadn't met yet, sleek, poised, and exuding an air of effortless superiority. "Father," Alexander greeted coolly, "I didn't expect to see you here." Richard's smile was sharp. "It's my job to support our charitable endeavors, isn't it? And I see you've brought your wife." His gaze slid to Emma, assessing her with the same cold precision he applied to stock portfolios. Emma extended a hand, forcing a polite smile. "Mr. Reed," Richard took her hand briefly, his grip firm but distant. "You're settling in well, I hope." "Well enough," Emma replied evenly. "Though it's taking some adjustment." "Undoubtedly," Richard said, his tone laced with subtle condescension. He turned to the woman at his side. "Emma, this is Eleanor Steele. She's an old friend of the family." "Charmed," Eleanor said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She leaned slightly toward Alexander. "And you've certainly kept things interesting, haven't you?" Alexander's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smirk. "Life's dull without a little intrigue." Eleanor's laughter was soft and calculated, the kind that made Emma's skin prickle. She felt like a fly caught in a web, and the two spiders were enjoying the sport of it. Alexander must have noticed her discomfort because he placed a steadying hand on her elbow. "If you'll excuse us," Alexander said smoothly, "I'd like to introduce Emma to a few others." Richard raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Alexander steered Emma away from the conversation. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Was that necessary?" she muttered under her breath. "Yes," Alexander replied. "Richard's testing you. Eleanor's part of it. She's been a family ally and a meddler for years." "Charming," Emma said dryly. As they made their way deeper into the crowd, Emma began to pick up on the subtle dynamics at play. Conversations here weren't just idle chatter. They were negotiations, exchanges of power and influence cloaked in civility. It was a language she wasn't fluent in, but she was starting to understand its cadence. At one point, they stopped near a small group of men in their 50s, all engaged in a discussion about market trends. Alexander introduced her, and though the men were polite, their interest was minimal. Emma felt like a prop, something Alexander had brought along to fulfill his role. The realization stung, though she reminded herself that she'd agreed to this. She was reaching for a glass of champagne from a passing tray when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found herself face to face with a man she hadn't expected to see. Daniel Carter. His features were striking, his smile easy, but there was something in his eyes, a glint of recognition, that set her on edge. "Emma, isn't it?" he said, his voice warm but probing. "That's right," she said, carefully neutral. "And you are?" "Daniel Carter," he said, extending a hand. "I knew I recognized you." Emma's pulse quickened. "Recognized me? From where?" Daniel tilted his head slightly, his smile widening. "Oh, just around." "You have one of those faces," she forced a laugh, though her unease deepened. "I suppose I do." Alexander returned to her side, his brow furrowing slightly as he noticed the exchange. "Daniel," he said, his tone cool, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I wouldn't miss it," Daniel said smoothly, "and I'm glad I came. Meeting your wife has been the highlight of the evening." Emma caught the faintest flicker of tension in Alexander's jaw, but he didn't rise to the bait. "Enjoy the evening," Alexander said pointedly, taking Emma's arm and steering her away. "What was that about?" Emma asked once they were out of earshot. "Nothing good," Alexander muttered. "Daniel's a rival, personally and professionally. Be careful around him." Emma nodded, though Daniel's parting smile lingered in her mind. The evening continued, the hours dragging as Emma moved through the motions. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped onto a battlefield she didn't fully understand. When they finally left the gala, Emma exhaled a sigh of relief as the cool night air hit her face. "I don't know how you do this," she said quietly as they climbed into the car. "You learn," Alexander said, his voice soft but firm. "And so will you." Emma glanced out the window, the city lights blurring as the car moved through the streets. She wasn't sure what she was learning yet, but one thing was clear: she was in deeper than she'd realized. The morning sunlight poured through the penthouse windows, softening the sharp edges of the room. Emma stood in the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee and staring out at the skyline. The events of the previous night lingered in her mind. Richard's calculated gaze, Melissa's icy demeanor, and most unsettling, Daniel's cryptic remarks. For someone who had spent years keeping to herself, stepping into Alexander's world felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Grace entering, carrying a tray of folded linens. The older woman gave Emma a warm smile. "Morning." "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," Emma admitted, setting her mug down on the counter. "Too much on my mind." Grace tilted her head, her expression kind but knowing. "It's a lot to take in, isn't it? This life, the expectations, the constant eyes on you." Emma leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "It's exhausting. And last night, Richard and his little games, Melissa's disdain. And then there's Daniel, who somehow knows more about me than I'm comfortable with." Grace nodded as she began arranging the linens in a nearby cabinet. "Richard's always been a strategist. He tests people, pushes them to see where they'll bend. Melissa's, well, she's her own kind of trouble. And Daniel Carter, he's someone to watch carefully. That man thrives on power plays." Emma sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know if I can keep up with all of this. It's like they're all playing a game, and I don't even know the rules." Grace paused, turning to face her. "You don't have to play their game, Emma. Make them play yours. You've got a strength they don't expect, something real. They might have money, influence, and connections, but none of that can replace authenticity." Emma stared at her, caught off guard by the words. "You think I can win against people like them?" Grace's smile deepened, lines crinkling at the corners of her eyes. "I think you've already started. Now, you just need to believe it yourself." Later that afternoon, Emma found herself in the library, flipping through the pages of a book without actually reading the words. The quiet was a welcome respite from the constant tension of the previous day. She barely noticed when Alexander entered until he spoke. "You've been quiet today," he said, his voice breaking the stillness. Emma glanced up, closing the book and setting it aside. "Just needed some time to think." Alexander sat in the armchair across from her, his gaze steady. "About last night?" "That and everything else," Emma admitted. "Daniel Carter, your father, Melissa, this whole situation. It's like being dropped into the middle of a war zone without armor." Alexander's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You handled yourself well, all things considered. I felt like a fish in a shark tank," Emma said, leaning back in her chair. "And Daniel, what's his deal?" Alexander's expression darkened slightly. "Daniel thrives on leverage. He's always looking for weaknesses to exploit. If he thinks he has something on you, he'll use it." Emma's stomach tightened. "And what if he does?" "Then we deal with it," Alexander said firmly. "Together." She studied him, her brow furrowing. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," he admitted. "But this isn't just about me anymore. You're part of this now, and I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." His words caught her off guard, and she looked away, unsure how to respond. There was something genuine in his tone, something that made her chest tighten. For all the pretense between them, Moments like this felt uncomfortably real. By evening, Emma found herself in the kitchen again, this time helping Grace prepare a simple meal. It was a rare moment of normalcy in a world that felt anything but normal. As they worked, Grace shared stories about her life, anecdotes that revealed a depth of character Emma hadn't expected. "I wasn't always in service," Grace said as she chopped vegetables. "I had my own business once, a little bakery in Queens. It was my dream." "What happened?" Emma asked, genuinely curious. Grace's hands stilled for a moment before she resumed chopping. "Life happened. My husband passed, and I couldn't keep up with the bills. The bakery closed, and I had to find other work to support my son." Emma felt a pang of empathy. That must have been hard. "It was," Grace admitted, her voice steady, "but you do what you have to do. And sometimes you find strength in places you didn't know you had." Emma nodded, her thoughts drifting. Grace's story resonated with her in a way she hadn't expected. For all her struggles, Grace had found a way to keep going, to build something meaningful despite the setbacks. It was a quiet kind of resilience, one Emma couldn't help but admire. That night, as Emma sat on the edge of her bed, she pulled out her old notebook. The pages were worn and crinkled, filled with fragments of her past, dreams, fears, moments of clarity. She flipped to a blank page and picked up a pen, the words flowing easily for the first time in weeks. "This isn't my world, and it never will be. But maybe, just maybe, I can find a place in it that's mine." She closed the notebook and set it on the nightstand, the weight in her chest feeling just a little lighter. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was standing on the outside looking in. Instead, she felt like she was starting to carve out her own space, one step at a time. The winter air was sharp as Emma stepped out onto the penthouse balcony, a steaming mug of tea warming her hands. The city stretched out before her in a dazzling display of lights, a patchwork of lives and ambitions that seemed impossibly distant. She leaned against the railing, her thoughts drifting back to the tension of the past week. For every small victory she'd managed, another complication seemed to arise. "You're going to freeze out here," came Alexander's voice from behind her. She turned to see him walking toward her, a thick wool coat draped over his arm. Without asking, he slipped it over her shoulders, his hands brushing hers briefly. The gesture was automatic, unspoken, but it left her feeling unsteady. "I needed air," Emma said, tightening the coat around herself. "Being inside all day makes me feel trapped." Alexander leaned against the railing beside her, his gaze focused on the skyline. "This isn't exactly an easy place to settle into." Emma laughed softly, the sound tinged with disbelief. "That's an understatement. Your world isn't just unfamiliar, it's suffocating. Every glance, every word feels like it's being dissected." "That's because it is," Alexander admitted. "Everyone in my father's orbit is constantly calculating, trying to find an advantage. It's exhausting." Emma studied him for a moment, the set of his jaw and the weariness in his eyes. "You've been doing this your whole life, haven't you?" He nodded. "I was groomed for it. The handshakes, the deals, the power plays, it's all second nature now." "And yet, here you are," she said, her voice soft, "fighting against it." Alexander's gaze met hers, and for a moment, the walls he usually kept so carefully in place seemed to waver. "Because I don't want to become him." The weight of his words hung between them, and Emma wasn't sure how to respond. She looked back out at the city, the quiet stretching on. The following afternoon, Emma sat in the sunlit corner of the penthouse's library, flipping through a book she wasn't really reading. Her mind wandered back to Daniel Carter. His presence at the gala and the glint of recognition in his eyes had unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. He knew something, she was sure of it, and that knowledge felt like a ticking bomb. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Grace entering until the older woman gently cleared her throat. "Emma, there's someone downstairs asking for you." "For me?" Emma asked, closing the book. "Who?" Grace hesitated, her brow furrowing. "A man. He wouldn't give his name, but he said it's important." Emma's stomach tightened. "Where is Alexander?" "He's in a meeting with his legal team," Grace said. "Do you want me to tell the visitor to leave?" "No," Emma said after a moment. "I'll go see who it is." Grace looked concerned but nodded. Emma followed her downstairs, her heart pounding as they approached the penthouse's private entrance. When the elevator doors opened, her breath hitched. It was Daniel. He smiled at her, that same disarming grin he'd worn at the gala. "Emma," he said smoothly, "I was hoping you'd have a moment to talk." "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Daniel spread his hands innocently. "I thought we could clear the air. I seem to have unsettled you the other night." "Unsettled is one word for it," Emma said, crossing her arms. "What do you want?" He stepped closer, his expression softening. "I want to help you." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Help me?" "With what?" "With whatever you're hiding," Daniel said quietly. His gaze was steady, but there was something calculating behind it. "You're not who you're pretending to be. I can see it, and I think you know I'm right." Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. "You don't know anything about me." "Maybe not yet," he said, leaning against the wall casually. "But I'm very good at finding out things. And if you don't want me to start digging, I'd suggest we make a deal." "What kind of deal?" Emma asked, her voice icy. "Information for information," Daniel said. "You tell me the truth about who you are, and I'll tell you what I know about Alexander's father. Believe me, there's plenty he wouldn't want you to hear." Emma's breath caught. She didn't trust Daniel. Everything about him screamed opportunist, but the promise of information about Richard Reed was tempting. He was the puppet master in Alexander's life, and any advantage against him could be invaluable. "I'll think about it," Emma said finally, keeping her tone neutral. Daniel's smile widened. "Fair enough, but don't take too long, Emma. Secrets have a way of surfacing whether we want them to or not." With that, he turned and walked back toward the elevator, leaving Emma standing frozen in place. She didn't move until she heard the elevator doors close behind him. When Alexander returned later that evening, Emma was waiting for him in the living room, her thoughts still racing. He set down his briefcase and gave her a questioning look. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, sitting beside her. "Not a ghost," she said slowly. "Daniel Carter. He came here today." Alexander's expression darkened instantly. "What did he want?" Emma hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. "He wanted to talk." "He said he has information about your father." Alexander's jaw tightened. "He's playing a game, Emma. Don't let him pull you into it." "He thinks I'm hiding something," Emma admitted, her voice quieter now. "And I think he's right." Alexander's eyes softened slightly. "Whatever he's after, you don't have to face it alone. If he makes another move, we'll handle it together." Emma nodded, though the weight of her past pressed heavily on her chest. Together, she thought, but for how long? The morning was still and heavy with an overcast sky, casting the penthouse in muted greys. Emma sat at the dining table, idly tracing patterns on the rim of her coffee mug. Alexander was across from her, scanning his phone with the focused intensity that seemed to come naturally to him. The silence between them was not strained, but not comfortable either, laden with the weight of unspoken truths. Finally, Emma broke the stillness. "We need to talk." Alexander looked up, his brows knitting together slightly. "About Daniel," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. "He knows something, Alexander, or at least he thinks he does." Alexander set his phone down, leaning back in his chair. Daniel thrives on half-truths and manipulation. Whatever he thinks he knows, he'll use it to his advantage. "I don't think it's just bluster," Emma countered. "He said he'd dig into my past." The faintest flicker of concern crossed Alexander's face, quickly replaced by his usual composure. "Do you think he'll find anything?" Emma hesitated, her fingers tightening around her mug. "Maybe." He leaned forward, his voice quieter but firmer. "Emma, if there's something I need to know, now's the time to tell me." The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and a plea all at once. Emma looked down, her thoughts racing. She'd kept her secrets buried for so long, the idea of unearthing them felt impossible. But now, with Daniel sniffing around, the walls she'd built were starting to crack. "Before I ended up on the streets, I had a different life," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "A family, a future. It all fell apart when my father's business collapsed. He lost everything, and when he passed, I had nothing." Alexander didn't interrupt, his gaze steady and patient. "I tried to rebuild," Emma continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I worked, I saved, but then I got tangled up with someone I shouldn't have trusted. He used me, drained what little I had left, and when I finally realized what was happening, it was too late. The debts weren't mine, but I was the one left to deal with them." Alexander's expression darkened. "And that's when you ended up on the streets?" Emma nodded, shame flickering across her face. "It was easier to disappear than to keep fighting a battle I couldn't win. But if Daniel starts digging, there are pieces of that life that could resurface." Alexander sat back, running a hand through his hair. "If he finds something, we'll deal with it. But you're not facing this alone, Emma. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." Emma blinked, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "You really mean that?" "I do," he said firmly. "You're in this mess because of me, and I'm not going to let anyone use your past against you." Later that day, Emma found herself in the kitchen with Grace, peeling carrots at the counter. The simple task grounded her, a welcome break from the tension that seemed to hang over her and Alexander like a storm cloud. "You're quiet today," Grace observed, glancing at her. Emma shrugged. "Just thinking." "About Daniel?" Grace asked knowingly. Emma nodded, setting down the peeler. "He's digging into my past, and if he finds something, I don't know what will happen." Grace wiped her hands on a towel and leaned against the counter, her expression thoughtful. "Emma, everyone has a past. The question isn't whether it'll come out, it's what you'll do when it does." Emma frowned. "That's easy for you to say. You've built a life here. I'm just passing through." Grace's smile was gentle. "We all feel like that sometimes, like we don't belong, but you're stronger than you think, and you've already proven you can handle more than most." Emma's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You always seem to know the right thing to say." "It comes with practice," Grace said, returning to her task. "And perspective." By evening, Emma was back in the library, the notebook she hadn't touched in days open in her lap. She stared at the blank page, her pen hovering above it as she tried to find the words. The truth she'd shared with Alexander still felt raw, but for the first time, she felt lighter for having said it. "They say the truth sets you free," she wrote. "But what if it also ties you down? What if the weight of it keeps you from moving forward?" The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Alexander entered, a folder in his hand. "I had a team look into Daniel, he said, sitting across from her. "It turns out he's been sniffing around my father too. He's looking for leverage on both of us." Emma's grip on the pen tightened. "So, what do we do?" "We stay ahead of him," Alexander said simply. "He's expecting us to react, to panic. We won't give him the satisfaction." Emma set her notebook aside, meeting his gaze. "And what about your father? If Daniel's working both sides, he might use this to manipulate him too." Alexander's jaw tightened. "That's a risk we'll have to manage, but one problem at a time." Emma nodded, the weight of their precarious situation settling over her again. Yet, for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope, not because their challenges had lessened, but because Alexander's determination gave her strength. As the city lights twinkled beyond the library's windows, Emma realized that for all the uncertainty ahead, she wasn't facing it alone, and for now, that was enough. The tension in the air was palpable as Emma and Alexander stood in the penthouse living room, their conversation interrupted by an unexpected knock at the door. Alexander's brow furrowed as he exchanged a wary glance with Emma before striding to answer it. The muffled voices that followed were indistinct, but when Alexander returned, his expression was grim. "It's Daniel," he said, his voice tight. "He's here." Emma's heart sank. She had spent the last 2 days trying to steady herself, to find her footing in the precarious world she'd agreed to navigate with Alexander. But the mere mention of Daniel made her feel as though that footing might crumble beneath her. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He says he has information to share," Alexander replied, his tone laced with irritation. "And I'd rather hear it directly than let him spin it somewhere else." Before Emma could respond, Daniel entered the room, his ever-present smirk firmly in place. He looked entirely too comfortable, as though he belonged here, and the sight of him filled her with unease. "Lovely place, Alex," Daniel said, his tone casual but barbed. "Very understated." "Get to the point," Alexander snapped, crossing his arms. Daniel chuckled, clearly enjoying the tension he was creating. "Always so impatient." "Fine. I've been doing a little digging, and I came across something interesting. Something I thought you'd want to hear before it leaks." Emma's stomach clenched as Daniel turned his gaze to her, the smugness in his expression making her want to bolt. "Emma," he said, his voice smooth. "Or should I say, Emma Grayson?" The name hit her like a physical blow, the air rushing from her lungs. Her instinct was to deny it, to play dumb, but she knew it would be futile. Daniel's eyes gleamed with triumph, and she realized that no amount of denial would erase what he now knew. Alexander's expression darkened, his posture stiffening. "What are you talking about?" Daniel leaned against the back of the sofa, his posture relaxed as he delivered his bombshell. "Emma here isn't just any former street dweller. She's the missing daughter of Theodore Grayson, the late industrialist whose company crumbled under mysterious circumstances." "That kind of name carries weight, Alex. Even now." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as Alexander turned to her, his gaze sharp and questioning. "Is it true?" She nodded slowly, her throat tight. "Yes." The weight of her admission hung heavily in the room, the silence deafening. Alexander's eyes searched hers, but it wasn't anger she saw there. It was something far more complicated. Hurt, betrayal. She couldn't tell. "Well," Daniel said, clapping his hands together. "This is fascinating. You really did find yourself a gem, Alex. I'm sure your father will be thrilled to learn about this little detail." "That's enough," Alexander said coldly. His tone left no room for argument. "Get out, Daniel." Daniel raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, don't shoot the messenger. But consider this a friendly warning. Secrets have a nasty way of surfacing, especially in our world." With that, he sauntered out, leaving the door open behind him. The sound of it clicking shut was like the echo of a detonated bomb. Alexander turned back to Emma, his jaw clenched. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma's chest tightened, the vulnerability of her secret now fully exposed. I didn't think it mattered anymore. That life, my family, it's gone. I didn't want it to define me, but it does matter, Alexander said, his voice quieter now. Not because of who you were, but because people like Daniel will use it against us. Emma dropped her gaze, the shame she'd carried for years bubbling to the surface. I didn't think anyone would remember me after my father died. The debts, the accusations, I just wanted to disappear. Alexander exhaled, his tension softening slightly. You could have trusted me. I wanted to, Emma admitted, her voice breaking, but every time I've trusted someone, it's cost me everything. The rawness in her words seemed to reach him. He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers briefly before falling back to his side. I get it, he said softly, but you're not alone in this anymore. If we're going to get through this, we have to trust each other. Emma nodded, though the weight of her past still pressed heavily on her chest. I'll try. That's a start, Alexander said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The moment was interrupted by the shrill ring of Alexander's phone. He pulled it from his pocket, his expression darkening as he read the screen. It's my father. Emma's breath caught. He knows, doesn't he? Alexander didn't answer immediately, his focus on the phone. Finally, he answered, his tone clipped. What is it? Emma could hear the faint, harsh voice of Richard Reed on the other end, though she couldn't make out the words. Alexander's expression hardened with each passing second. Understood, he said finally, before hanging up and turning to Emma. He wants to meet tonight. Emma swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. What do? We go, Alexander said, his voice steady but grim. If we don't face this head-on, he'll find a way to make it worse. Emma nodded, her resolve hardening. She had spent years running from her past, but now it had caught up to her. There was no escaping it, not anymore, and for the first time she realized she didn't want to run. Not this time. The black town car glided through the streets of Manhattan, its interior cloaked in a heavy silence. Emma sat stiffly, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Alexander stared out the window, his jaw set in grim determination. The tension between them felt almost suffocating, but neither spoke. Words would be wasted now. The moment of truth was imminent. As they pulled up to the private dining club Richard Reed often used for his more discreet meetings, Emma's stomach churned. The grandeur of the place only heightened her unease. Its elegant facade was designed to intimidate, to remind anyone who entered that this was a space reserved for power. Ready? Alexander asked, his voice quiet but firm. No, Emma admitted, glancing at him, but I don't think that matters. Alexander gave her a faint, fleeting smile. Just follow my lead. We'll get through this. They stepped out of the car and were ushered into a private room by a waiting attendant. Inside, Richard sat at the head of an opulent table, his posture as rigid and commanding as ever. His piercing gaze landed on them as they entered, and though his expression was neutral, Emma felt the weight of his disapproval. Melissa Harrington sat to his left, her cool, calculated smirk making Emma's skin crawl. Alexander, Richard said, his voice smooth and authoritative. Emma, how kind of you to join us. We didn't think we had much of a choice, Alexander replied, his tone clipped. He pulled out a chair for Emma before sitting beside her, his body angled protectively toward her. Ah, straight to business then, Richard said, leaning back slightly. I suppose that's wise, given the circumstances. Emma fought to steady her breathing, her heart pounding as she prepared for the inevitable confrontation. You've made quite the impression, Emma, Richard continued, his sharp gaze shifting to her, though not all of it has been favorable. Alexander's eyes narrowed. If this is about Daniel Carter, Richard held up a hand, silencing his son. It's not just about Daniel. It's about the reputation of this family, about the decisions you've made, Alexander, and the consequences that follow. Emma clenched her fists under the table, her voice steady but low. Whatever you've heard, Mr. Reed, I can assure you— Oh, I've heard plenty, Richard interrupted, his tone icy, about your past, your family, the scandals that dragged your name through the mud. Tell me, do you honestly believe you belong here? Emma felt the blood drain from her face, but she refused to look away. I don't claim to belong, she said, her voice calm despite the storm raging inside her. But I didn't ask to be part of this either. Alexander brought me into it. Richard's lips twitched in a faint smile, as if amused by her defiance. And you accepted, didn't you? Quite convenient, considering your circumstances. That's enough, Alexander said sharply, his tone brooking no argument. You wanted to meet, so let's be clear. Emma is my wife, and she's not going anywhere. Whatever game you're playing, it ends now. Richard's expression hardened, the faint amusement vanishing. You think you can dictate terms to me, Alexander? Do you have any idea what's at stake? I know exactly what's at stake, Alexander shot back. But I'm done letting you control my life. The tension in the room was palpable, the unspoken battle between father and son unfolding like a chess match. Melissa, who had been silent until now, leaned forward, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. You're making a mistake, Alexander, she said, her gaze icy. Do you really think she can handle this world? Do you even know what she's capable of? Emma's chest tightened, but she refused to let Melissa's words shake her. I've handled more than you'll ever know, she said quietly, and I don't need your approval to prove it. Melissa's smirk faltered, but Richard's attention remained fixed on Alexander. You've tied yourself to someone who will only drag you down, he said, his tone dangerously calm. Is that what you want for your future, for this family? Alexander's jaw clenched, his voice cold. What I want is a life that's mine, not yours, and if you can't accept that, then I'll walk away from all of it. The room fell silent, Richard's gaze narrowing as he studied his son. For a moment, Emma thought he might lash out, but instead he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. You're willing to risk everything for her, Richard said finally, his voice quieter, but no less commanding. Is that your final decision? It is, Alexander said without hesitation. Emma's breath caught at the certainty in his voice. She glanced at him, her chest tightening at the weight of what he was willing to give up. For her. Richard exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting to Emma. Then I hope, for both your sakes, that she's worth it. The words were not a blessing, but a warning, and they hung in the air long after Richard stood and left the room. Melissa followed without a word, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Emma turned to Alexander, her voice trembling. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he said firmly, his gaze steady. I meant what I said, Emma. We're in this together. For the first time, Emma felt the faintest flicker of hope, not just for herself, but for them. And as they left the club together, the storm that had loomed over her life for so long didn't feel quite so suffocating anymore. The ride back to the penthouse was steeped in silence, the tension between Emma and Alexander tangible. The confrontation with Richard lingered like a bitter aftertaste. Emma's thoughts churned, a whirlwind of guilt, gratitude, and unease. She glanced at Alexander, whose expression was a mask of stoic resolve, his jaw tight and his hands resting loosely on his knees. Finally, she broke the silence. You didn't have to stand up to him like that. It could cost you everything. Alexander's gaze remained fixed on the passing lights outside. I told you, Emma. This is my choice. I'm not going to let him dictate my life anymore. But she began, only for him to cut her off, his voice softer but no less firm. "No more but, Emma. I'm done pretending I care about his approval. If he thinks he can use you to control me, he's wrong." His words left her momentarily speechless. She wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't owe her anything. But there was something in his tone that silenced her protests. Instead, she turned her attention to the view outside, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her coat. When they reached the penthouse, Alexander headed straight for the bar, pouring himself a generous glass of scotch. Emma hesitated in the doorway, unsure if she should follow or give him space. Finally, she stepped inside, her voice hesitant. "You're angry." He looked at her over the rim of his glass. "Not at you." Emma leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "Then at who? Your father, Melissa, Daniel?" Alexander sighed, setting the glass down. "All of them. Myself, too, for letting it get this far." "You can't blame yourself for your father's manipulations," Emma said quietly. "He's been doing this for years. You said it yourself." "That doesn't make it any easier," he muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. "I should have seen this coming. I should have prepared for it." Emma hesitated before stepping closer, her voice soft but steady. "You don't have to shoulder all of this alone, Alexander. We're in this together, remember?" His eyes met hers, the weight of his frustration giving way to something softer, more vulnerable. "It's not just about my father or the company, Emma. It's about you. I dragged you into this, and now your past is being used as a weapon. If anything happens to you because of me—" "Stop," Emma interrupted, her voice firmer than she expected. "I agreed to this. I knew the risks. And honestly, I've been running from my past for so long. Maybe it's time I stopped. You standing up to your father tonight, it reminded me that I don't have to keep hiding." Alexander studied her, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Emma's lips twitched into a faint smile. "And you're better than you think you are." The moment stretched between them, a fragile understanding forming in the silence. Finally, Alexander stepped back, draining the rest of his scotch. "We'll need a plan. My father won't back down easily." "And Daniel?" Emma asked, her chest tightening at the mention of his name. "Daniel's a wild card," Alexander admitted. "He thrives on chaos, and he'll do anything to gain the upper hand, but he's also predictable in his greed." "We'll find a way to neutralize him," Emma nodded, though her stomach churned at the thought. She didn't trust Daniel or her ability to outmaneuver him. The following day, Alexander left early for a meeting, leaving Emma alone in the penthouse. She spent the morning trying to focus on anything but the turmoil swirling in her mind. Eventually, she found herself in the library, her old notebook open in her lap. The blank page stared back at her, waiting. "Truth feels heavier than lies," she wrote, "but maybe that weight is what keeps us grounded." She paused, the pen hovering above the paper, when a knock at the door startled her. Grace appeared moments later, her expression cautious. "There's someone here to see you," Grace said. Emma frowned, her heart sinking. "Who?" "Daniel Carter." Emma's chest tightened, her pulse quickening. "What does he want now?" "He wouldn't say," Grace replied, her voice laced with concern. "Do you want me to send him away?" Emma hesitated, her mind racing. She wanted nothing more than to avoid Daniel altogether, but she knew it wouldn't solve anything. She nodded reluctantly. "No, I'll see him." Grace led Daniel into the library moments later, his ever-present smirk firmly in place. Emma remained seated, her posture stiff as he sauntered toward her. "Emma," he said smoothly, "always a pleasure." "Cut to the chase, Daniel," she said, her tone icy. "What do you want?" His smirk widened. "Straight to the point." "I like that. Fine. I thought you might want to know." I've had an interesting conversation with someone from your past, a former associate of your father's. Emma's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. And, Daniel continued, he had quite a lot to say about the Grayson Empire's collapse, about some missing funds, shady deals, things that could raise a few eyebrows if they came to light. Emma's chest tightened. You're bluffing. Am I? Daniel asked, leaning closer. Why don't you test me and find out? Emma forced herself to hold his gaze, though her mind raced. What do you want, Daniel? For now, he said, straightening with a grin. Just a little cooperation. But don't worry, Emma. I'll let you know when I need more. Without another word, he turned and left, leaving Emma frozen in place, her hands trembling. The storm she thought she was prepared for had just grown darker, and she wasn't sure if she could weather it. The library felt colder after Daniel left, though the temperature hadn't changed. Emma sat motionless in the chair, her mind racing as she replayed his words. He had spoken with someone connected to her father, a name she had buried with the rest of her past. Missing funds, shady deals. If there was truth to his claims, it could not only destroy her fragile footing in Alexander's world, but also tarnish the memory of her father, a man she had fought to defend even in his absence. A knock on the doorframe startled her, and she looked up to see Grace standing there, her face etched with concern. Are you all right? Emma forced a nod, though her voice betrayed her. I'm fine. Grace stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind her. I've seen that look before. Whatever Daniel said, don't let it rattle you. He's a snake. Emma gave her a weak smile. He's more than a snake. He's a hurricane, and I'm standing in his path. Grace hesitated before pulling up a chair and sitting across from her. You don't have to face him alone, you know. Alexander already has enough to deal with, Emma interrupted, her tone sharper than intended. She softened immediately, her eyes apologetic. I just don't want to add to his problems. Grace reached over, placing a gentle hand on Emma's. Emma, if there's one thing I've learned working for this family, it's that problems don't go away when you ignore them. They grow. And the only way to deal with someone like Daniel is to confront him head-on. Emma nodded, though her heart remained heavy. I just don't know where to start. Grace smiled faintly, her voice calm and steady. Start with what you know, and remember, the truth has a way of rising above the lies. When Alexander returned that evening, he found Emma seated at the kitchen counter, a cup of tea in her hands. The sight of her, lost in thought, pulled at something in him. He set his briefcase down and approached quietly. You're still thinking about Daniel, he said, more statement than question. Emma glanced up, the weight of her thoughts clear in her expression. I can't stop. He's digging into my past, and now he's claiming there's more to my father's downfall than I ever knew. Alexander leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Do you believe him? I don't know, Emma admitted. My father wasn't perfect, but he wasn't corrupt. He always told me his business failed because he trusted the wrong people. But if Daniel's right... She trailed off, her throat tightening. If Daniel's right, Alexander said carefully, then we'll find out together. Whatever he's holding over you, we'll expose the truth. Emma looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. What if the truth isn't what I want it to be? Alexander's gaze softened, and he moved closer, his hand brushing hers lightly. Then we'll deal with it, together. She searched his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the crushing weight of her fear eased slightly. Thank you, she said quietly. Alexander nodded, his expression resolute. We'll start tomorrow. I'll have someone dig into Daniel's claims and track down this associate of your father's. If there's any truth to what Daniel's saying, we'll find it. Emma's lips twitched into a faint smile. You make it sound so easy. It won't be, Alexander said, his voice steady. But nothing worth fighting forever is. The next morning, Emma and Alexander worked in tandem to unravel the threads of Daniel's claims. Alexander's network of private investigators proved invaluable, and by midday they had a name: Charles Davenport, a former partner in her father's company. The name was like a ghost from her past, one she hadn't thought about in years. He's still in the city, Alexander said as they reviewed the report. If anyone can shed light on what really happened, it's him. Emma hesitated, her stomach churning. Do you think he'll talk to us? Alexander glanced at her, his expression firm. He will. If he had any part in what happened to your father, he owes you answers. Later that afternoon, they arrived at a modest townhouse on the Upper West Side. Charles Davenport was a shadow of the man Emma remembered from childhood, his once imposing frame now hunched with age, his face lined with regret. He opened the door cautiously, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Emma. Emma Grayson, he said, his voice a mix of surprise and unease. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Emma swallowed hard. I didn't think I'd come back. Charles stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. The interior of the house was cozy, but worn, filled with books and framed photographs that told the story of a simpler life. He led them to a small sitting room and gestured for them to sit. I suppose you're here about your father, Charles said, his voice heavy. Emma nodded, her throat tight. Daniel Carter claims there were irregularities, missing funds. I need to know if it's true. Charles's expression darkened, and he leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. Your father wasn't a thief, Emma, but he was betrayed. Emma's heart clenched. By who? Charles hesitated, his gaze flicking to Alexander before returning to Emma. By someone he trusted, a man named William Harrington. Emma's breath caught. Melissa's father. Charles nodded. He orchestrated a deal that left your father holding the bag. By the time Theodore realized what had happened, it was too late. The company collapsed, and William walked away unscathed. Emma's mind reeled, the pieces of her past clicking into place in ways she'd never imagined. She glanced at Alexander, whose expression was a mix of anger and resolve. Thank you, Emma said, her voice trembling. For telling me. Charles nodded, his eyes softening. Your father was a good man, Emma. He deserved better. As they left, Emma felt a surge of determination. Her father's name had been dragged through the mud, but now, for the first time, she had the truth, and she wouldn't stop until justice was served. The townhouse door closed softly behind them, but the truth Charles Davenport had revealed slammed into Emma like a freight train. She felt lightheaded. The revelation that William Harrington, Melissa's father, had orchestrated her family's downfall, weaving threads of anger and disbelief through her chest. The cold air outside was a welcome slap, but it wasn't enough to steady her. Alexander placed a hand on her lower back, a silent offer of support as they walked toward the car. Emma, he said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension in his jaw. Are you all right? She shook her head, the lump in her throat too large to speak around. They climbed into the waiting car, and as soon as the door closed, she exhaled sharply, her hands trembling in her lap. William Harrington, she whispered, the name dripping with venom. All these years I thought my father's collapse was a cruel twist of fate, but it wasn't. It was him. Alexander's gaze darkened, his hand brushing hers. You couldn't have known. And now that we do, we'll use it. Emma's laugh was bitter, her eyes glassy as she stared out the window. Use it? How? He's dead, Alexander. And his daughter. She's practically royalty in your world. What am I supposed to do with this? You fight back. Alexander said, his tone firm but calm. Melissa may not have been involved in her father's schemes, but she's benefiting from them. Her family's legacy is built on lies, and I'll be damned if they think they can manipulate us with impunity. Emma turned to him, her eyes narrowing. And what about your father? Richard has been aligned with the Harringtons for years. You think he didn't know about this? Alexander hesitated, his lips pressing into a thin line. If he knew, I'll find out. But we focus on one battle at a time. Emma nodded, though her chest felt tight. It wasn't just about the Harringtons or Richard anymore. It was about proving that her father's name deserved to be cleared. She wasn't sure she had the strength to fight all the battles ahead, but with Alexander beside her, she felt a flicker of hope. That evening, Emma sat at the kitchen counter, staring at a half-empty glass of wine. The penthouse was quiet, save for the occasional hum of the refrigerator. Alexander had disappeared into his study to contact his legal team and investigators, leaving her to wrestle with her thoughts alone. She was lost in memories. Her father's warm smile, his quiet determination, the way he had always told her that doing the right thing mattered more than winning, when the sound of footsteps pulled her back to the present. Alexander entered the room, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. Exhaustion etched into his face. "Any updates?" Emma asked, her voice quiet. Alexander poured himself a drink before leaning against the counter opposite her. "My team's digging into the Harringtons' financials. If there's any evidence linking Melissa's father to your family's collapse, we'll find it." Emma nodded, though the weight of the day still pressed heavily on her chest. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Alexander's gaze softened, and he set his glass down, stepping closer. "Emma, you don't have to thank me. This isn't just about your father or your past. It's about us. If we don't stand together, Richard, Melissa, and people like Daniel will tear us apart." His words warmed something deep inside her, though she hesitated to let it show. "You've already risked so much for me, Alexander. What if this fight costs you more than you're prepared to give?" "Then it costs me," he said simply. "I've spent my whole life doing what my father wanted, following the rules of his world. For once, I'm doing what I believe is right." Emma's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You sound like my father. He always said doing the right thing wasn't easy, but it was worth it." Alexander smiled back, a rare warmth lighting his features. Then he was a wise man. They stood there in the quiet for a moment, the weight of their shared purpose binding them together in ways Emma hadn't expected. Finally, Alexander straightened, his tone turning practical. "We'll need to confront Melissa soon. If she's aware of what her father did, or if she's benefiting from it, she's not going to go down without a fight." Emma nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm ready." The next day, Alexander arranged a meeting with Melissa under the guise of discussing a charity initiative. They chose a neutral location, a private room at an upscale restaurant downtown. Emma dressed carefully, choosing a tailored navy dress that exuded confidence without feeling pretentious. Alexander, ever composed, looked sharp in a charcoal suit that emphasized his commanding presence. When Melissa arrived, her cool, calculating demeanor was firmly in place. She greeted Alexander with a faint smile and Emma with barely a glance. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Melissa asked as she settled into her chair, her tone dripping with politeness. Alexander leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "We've uncovered some troubling information, Melissa. About your father and his involvement in the collapse of Theodore Grayson's company." Melissa's smile didn't falter, but Emma saw a flicker of tension in her eyes. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I think you know exactly what I'm implying," Alexander said, his voice steady. Your father orchestrated a scheme that destroyed a man's life, and now you're reaping the benefits. Melissa's gaze flicked to Emma, her smirk sharpening. I see. This is about you. Digging up ancient history to settle old scores. Emma's voice was steady, though her chest burned with anger. This isn't ancient history to me, Melissa. It's my family's legacy. Melissa tilted her head, her expression almost pitying. And what do you hope to achieve, Emma? My father's gone, and his name is untouchable. You think anyone will care about your sob story? Alexander's voice cut through the tension like a blade. We'll make them care. Melissa's smirk faltered, and for the first time she looked uncertain. The battle lines were drawn, and Emma knew this was only the beginning. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was on the verge of reclaiming what was hers, and she wouldn't back down. The tension in the room crackled like a live wire, stretching taut between the three occupants. Melissa sat back in her chair, her manicured fingers lightly tapping against the polished wooden armrest. Her cool exterior betrayed no panic, but Emma could see the faintest flicker of unease in her eyes. Alexander, seated beside Emma, radiated a calm determination that made Melissa's confidence feel brittle in comparison. Careful, Alex, Melissa said finally, her voice laced with mockery. Accusing the dead of crimes without proof is a dangerous game. Alexander didn't flinch. We have more than you think, Melissa. Charles Davenport gave us everything we need. Bank records, contracts. Your father left a trail, and it leads directly to the destruction of Theodore Grayson's company. Melissa's smirk wavered, but she quickly recovered, leaning forward with a practiced air of condescension. And what exactly do you plan to do with this so-called evidence? Drag my family's name through the mud. Make yourself an enemy of the Harrington legacy? Emma, her heart pounding but her voice steady, interjected, This isn't about legacy, Melissa. It's about justice. My father didn't deserve to be ruined, and I won't let his name carry the weight of something your father did. Melissa's gaze shifted to Emma, sharp as a blade. You think justice matters in this world? Let me give you some advice, Emma. Power matters. Influence matters. The story people believe is the one I tell them. Emma met her gaze without flinching, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. You're right. Power matters. But so does truth. And this time, the truth is on my side. Melissa's expression froze for a moment, and Emma saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her features. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by an icy smile. You're out of your depth, darling. Alexander leaned forward, his voice cold and unyielding. Emma isn't alone. If you think you can brush this under the rug, think again. The Harrington name isn't untouchable. Not anymore. For the first time, Melissa hesitated, her mask slipping slightly. What do you want? She asked, her voice quieter now, edged with something close to resignation. Emma exchanged a glance with Alexander before speaking. Acknowledgement. Accountability. Your family profited from my father's destruction. I want that story told. Melissa's laugh was brittle. And what would that accomplish, Emma? The world moves on. No one cares about your father anymore. I care, Emma said firmly, and I think a lot of people will care once they know the truth. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Melissa's eyes darted between Emma and Alexander, calculating her next move. Finally, she exhaled sharply, her composure faltering. You're determined to make this difficult for me, aren't you? Melissa said, her voice laced with bitterness. Alexander's expression didn't waver. Only as difficult as it needs to be. Melissa stood abruptly, smoothing her dress as though regaining control. This isn't over, she said, her tone icy. You think you've won something here, but you're playing with fire. She turned on her heel and left the room without another word, her departure as cold as her threats. The door closed behind her, leaving Emma and Alexander alone in the charged silence. Emma slumped back in her chair, the adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation draining from her body. "Do you think she'll retaliate?" "She will," Alexander said without hesitation, his voice steady but serious. "But she's shaken." "That's a good start." Emma sighed, her fingers brushing the edge of the table. It felt like she had the upper hand the entire time. "I'm not sure we accomplished anything." "We accomplished more than you think," Alexander said, leaning closer. "She's used to controlling the narrative, but now she's on the defensive. She knows we're serious, and that's not a position she's comfortable in." Emma nodded, though doubt lingered in her mind. What if she's right? What if no one cares about the truth? Alexander's gaze softened, and he reached across the table, placing a hand over hers. "Then we make them care. This isn't just about your father or the Harringtons. It's about proving that their power isn't absolute." Emma's chest tightened at the warmth in his voice, the weight of his support grounding her. For so long, she had felt like she was fighting an invisible battle alone. But now, with Alexander by her side, the fight didn't seem so impossible. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander gave her a faint smile, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You don't have to thank me, Emma. We're in this together." The following morning, the fallout from their confrontation with Melissa began to ripple outward. Emma awoke to the sound of Alexander's phone, buzzing incessantly. He was already out of bed, pacing near the window as he fielded calls from his legal team and associates. His tone was clipped but calm, his words sharp as he discussed their next steps. Emma joined him, clutching a mug of coffee as she listened to fragments of the conversation. When he finally hung up, he turned to her, his expression serious but focused. "Melissa's already trying to spin this," he said. "She's reaching out to the press, trying to discredit Davenport and bury any connection between her family and your father's company." Emma's stomach sank. "Can she succeed?" "She'll try," Alexander admitted, "but she's panicking, which means she's likely to make mistakes. We just need to stay ahead of her." Emma nodded, determination hardening her resolve. "Then let's stay ahead." Alexander's lips curved into a faint smile, his admiration for her evident. "That's the spirit." As the days stretched on, Emma and Alexander worked tirelessly, preparing for the battles ahead. They didn't know what Melissa's next move would be, but one thing was certain: the lines had been drawn, and neither side was willing to back down. And for the first time, Emma felt ready to fight, not just for her father, but for herself. The next few days unfolded in a flurry of activity, each hour marked by mounting tension as Emma and Alexander braced themselves for Melissa's retaliation. True to form, the Harrington family's influence began seeping into the public narrative. Whispers of Theodore Grayson's mismanagement resurfaced in carefully placed media articles, suggesting his collapse had been self-inflicted. It was an insidious campaign, calculated to erode Emma's credibility before her story even took root. Emma sat in Alexander's study, scrolling through her phone as her stomach twisted. Each headline felt like a personal attack. Forgotten scandal. Grayson family's troubled legacy resurfaces, revisiting the fall of Grayson Industries, unveiling the truth behind the collapse. She tossed the phone onto the desk with a frustrated sigh. "She's dismantling my father's name all over again." Alexander looked up from his laptop, his eyes narrowing as he read her expression. "That's exactly what she wants. If she can control the narrative, she keeps the upper hand." Emma ran a hand through her hair, her voice tight. "And what are we doing? Sitting here while she twists the truth?" Alexander leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. "We're not sitting. My team is vetting the evidence Davenport gave us. Once it's solid, we'll release it strategically. But we can't rush this, Emma. If we go too soon, she'll tear it apart. Emma clenched her fists, frustration simmering beneath her skin. I hate this. I hate feeling powerless. You're not powerless, Alexander said, his voice softening. This is your story, Emma. When the time comes, you'll be the one to tell it. And when you do, it'll be stronger than anything she can fabricate. His words settled over her like a balm, easing the sharp edges of her frustration. She met his gaze, her shoulders relaxing slightly. I just don't want her to win, not again. She won't, Alexander said with quiet certainty. Not while I'm standing with you. By the following morning, Emma's resolve had hardened. She sat with Alexander in the penthouse living room, their legal and PR teams gathered around them. A sprawling web of papers, timelines, and talking points covered the coffee table, each piece meticulously crafted to counter Melissa's attacks. We have enough to show financial ties between William Harrington and the fraudulent accounts that led to Grayson Industries' collapse, one of the investigators said, pointing to a series of highlighted documents. It's not just circumstantial. This is solid evidence. Emma leaned forward, her voice steady despite the nerves tightening her chest. And if we release this, will it be enough to hold up against Melissa's influence? The team exchanged glances before Alexander's lead lawyer spoke. It'll be enough to shift public perception, but we need to be strategic. Melissa has resources and connections. If we don't control the release, she'll spin it before it lands. Emma nodded, her mind already racing. Then we control it. We make sure the first move is ours. Alexander's lips curved into a faint smile. Exactly. They spent the rest of the day crafting a comprehensive plan, a carefully timed release to a trusted journalist, a detailed exposé backed by irrefutable evidence, and a statement from Emma herself. Every detail was scrutinized, every potential counter-move anticipated. By nightfall, the plan was in motion. Emma sat in the quiet of her bedroom, staring out at the city lights as her heart pounded. The thought of stepping into the spotlight, of telling her father's story to a world that might not believe her, was daunting, but it was also necessary. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Alexander stepped inside, his expression softer than it had been all day. You should get some rest, he said, crossing the room to stand beside her. Tomorrow's going to be big. Emma gave him a small smile, though her nerves betrayed her. Resting is hard when you know the world's about to scrutinize your entire life. Alexander leaned against the window frame, his hands in his pockets. They're not just scrutinizing you, they're scrutinizing us, and we're ready. The warmth in his voice steadied her, and for a moment, the weight of her fears lifted. Thank you, she said softly. For standing by me through all of this. You don't need to thank me, he replied. I told you, Emma, we're in this together. She met his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, the chaos of the world outside faded into the background. In that silence, she realized how much his presence had come to mean to her, not just as an ally, but as someone who truly believed in her. The next morning, the exposé was published. It hit the media like a tidal wave, its headline bold and unflinching. The hidden truth behind Grayson Industries' collapse, how the Harrington empire profited from betrayal. The article laid out the evidence meticulously, weaving a compelling narrative of deception and greed. Emma's statement at the end was raw and heartfelt, a tribute to her father's integrity and a call for accountability. Within hours, the story was trending, sparking debates on news panels and social media alike. As Emma watched the coverage unfold, a mix of relief and trepidation filled her. Do you think it's enough? She asked Alexander, who stood beside her, his eyes glued to the television. It's more than enough, he said, his voice steady. This is the kind of story that doesn't go away, no matter how hard Melissa tries to bury it. Emma nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. For the first time in years, it felt like the truth was finally within her grasp. But she knew the battle wasn't over. Not yet. And as she turned back to the screen, her resolve only deepened. She wasn't just fighting for her father anymore. She was fighting for herself, for her future, and for the justice she knew he deserved. And no matter what Melissa threw at her, Emma was ready. The fallout from the expose was swift and chaotic. Phones rang incessantly in the penthouse as Alexander's legal and PR teams scrambled to manage the media storm. Emma sat in the corner of the living room, her laptop open, scrolling through the endless cascade of headlines, tweets, and posts. Harrington legacy questioned, new allegations of corporate fraud. Emma Grayson breaks silence on family's fall from grace. Power plays and betrayal. The hidden story behind Grayson Industries' collapse. Her face was everywhere, her name trending across every platform. It was overwhelming, and for the first time, Emma fully understood the gravity of what she had set in motion. She closed her laptop with trembling hands, looking over at Alexander, who was on the phone with one of his attorneys. "Yes, but ensure they don't deviate from the statement," he was saying, his voice calm but commanding. "Any speculation will play into her hands." When he hung up, he turned to Emma, his expression softening. "How are you holding up?" Emma exhaled, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel relieved, but it's a lot." Alexander sat beside her, his presence steadying. "That's normal. You've been carrying this weight for years, and now it's out there. It'll take time to adjust." Emma nodded, though her nerves remained frayed. "Do you think she'll respond?" "She will," Alexander said without hesitation. "Melissa doesn't take hits like this lying down." As if on cue, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. "Speak of the devil!" Emma leaned forward, her stomach twisting. "It's her!" Alexander nodded and answered, his tone measured. "Melissa." Emma couldn't hear what was said on the other end, but Alexander's expression darkened as the conversation unfolded. "You brought this on yourself," he said, his voice firm. "If you want to talk, we can do it publicly. Otherwise, I suggest you focus on damage control." He ended the call, setting his phone down with a sigh. "She's livid." "What did she say?" Emma asked, her voice quieter now. "She claims the article is defamatory and that she'll pursue legal action if we don't retract it," Alexander said, leaning back. "It's an empty threat. The evidence we released is airtight." Emma frowned, her hands knotting together in her lap. "She's not just going to give up, is she?" "No," Alexander admitted. "But that doesn't mean she'll win." By the next morning, Melissa had indeed launched her counterstrike. Her legal team issued statements denouncing the exposé as a smear campaign orchestrated by Emma and Alexander to discredit her family. Interviews with loyal Harrington allies flooded the airwaves, painting Emma as a bitter opportunist, seeking to revive a forgotten scandal for personal gain. Emma watched the news coverage in the penthouse kitchen, her chest tightening with every word. "They're making me out to be a villain," she muttered, her frustration spilling over. Alexander stood at the counter pouring coffee. "That's exactly what I expected. It's the only move she has left, discredit you to save herself." "But what if people believe her?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "What if everything I've done is for nothing?" Alexander set the coffee pot down, his gaze steady as he met hers. "They won't. The truth is out there, Emma, and it's backed by evidence. People will see through her lies." Emma nodded, though doubt lingered in her mind. She wanted to believe him, but the sheer power of Melissa's influence felt insurmountable. Later that day, Emma received an unexpected email. It was from a journalist who had worked closely with Melissa in the past, someone who had benefited from the Harrington family's connections. The message was short and cryptic. "I have information that could help you. Meet me at the Parkview Cafe at 3 p.m. Come alone." Emma stared at the screen, her heart racing. The offer was tempting, but it felt dangerous. A trap, perhaps. She hesitated before forwarding the email to Alexander, adding a brief note. "What do you think?" He replied almost immediately. "It could be genuine, but it's risky. I'll go with you, but I'll keep my distance." At 3 p.m., Emma walked into the Parkview Cafe, her nerves fraying with each step. The space was warm and bustling, the clatter of dishes and hum of conversation providing a sharp contrast to her tension. She scanned the room and spotted a man sitting at a corner table, his features partially obscured by a baseball cap. As she approached, he looked up, his expression cautious. "Emma Grayson?" She nodded, sliding into the seat across from him. "You said you had information." He glanced around the room before leaning closer. "Melissa Harrington isn't as untouchable as she wants people to think. I worked for her PR team for years. I helped bury things, scandals, shady deals. But there's one thing I couldn't shake, her father's offshore accounts." Emma's breath caught. "Offshore accounts." He nodded. "The same ones that siphoned money out of Grayson Industries. She knows about them. She's been using the leftovers to fund her projects. If you can tie those accounts to your father's collapse, it's over for her." Emma's mind raced, the enormity of the revelation settling over her. "Do you have proof?" He slid a USB drive across the table. "It's all there, but be careful. Melissa doesn't play fair." Emma took the drive, her fingers trembling. "Why are you doing this?" "Because people like her don't deserve to win," he said simply, "and because it's time someone stood up to her." As Emma left the cafe, Alexander followed at a discreet distance, his expression tense. When they reached the car, he turned to her, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the drive in her hand. "Did he give you something?" he asked. Emma nodded, holding it up. "Evidence. If it's real, it could be the final blow." Alexander's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then let's make sure it is." As they drove back to the penthouse, Emma felt a spark of hope reignite in her chest. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, victory felt within reach. The penthouse was eerily quiet as Emma and Alexander sat in the study, the USB drive resting ominously on the desk between them. Alexander's tech specialist, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, worked swiftly at the computer, pulling files from the drive while her fingers flew across the keyboard. "This is gold," Claire said, her voice laced with awe. "Bank statements, wire transfers, and even internal correspondence. It's all here, offshore accounts linked directly to William Harrington's shell companies. And look at this." She clicked a few keys, bringing up an email exchange between Melissa and her father. She knew everything. Emma leaned forward, her heart pounding as she scanned the emails. The correspondence detailed Melissa's involvement in managing the accounts after her father's death, siphoning money for personal ventures while maintaining the Harrington family's facade of success. "She's been living off stolen money," Emma said, her voice trembling. "Money that should have been my father's, my family's." Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding. "This changes everything." Claire nodded. "It's not just a smoking gun, it's a flamethrower. If this goes public, it'll obliterate her credibility." Emma's stomach churned. The weight of the evidence was staggering, but so were the stakes. "If we release this, it'll ruin her, her career, her name. Everything." "She deserves it," Alexander said firmly, his voice like steel. "After what she and her father did to your family, to you, this is justice." Emma hesitated, her mind racing. She thought of her father, his quiet dignity even in the face of ruin, and the years she'd spent scraping by with nothing but the truth of his innocence to hold on to. She looked at Alexander, her voice quiet but resolute. "Then let's do it." The next day, Emma and Alexander held a press conference in a small but elegant venue, its intimate setting chosen to underscore the gravity of their revelations. Cameras flashed as journalists packed the room, their murmurs filling the air with anticipation. Emma stood at the podium, Alexander by her side. She had spent the night rehearsing her statement, but as she looked out at the expectant faces, the words she had prepared felt distant and hollow. Instead, she spoke from the heart. "My name is Emma Grayson," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves coiled in her chest. "For years, my family's name has been tied to a narrative of failure and disgrace, a narrative carefully constructed to hide the truth." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "Today, I'm here to set the record straight. The collapse of Grayson Industries was not the result of my father's mismanagement, as many have been led to believe. It was the deliberate work of William Harrington, aided by financial manipulation and deceit." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, but Emma pressed on. "Evidence uncovered by my team reveals that Melissa Harrington, his daughter, not only knew of these actions, but has been benefiting from the stolen funds ever since." She gestured to Alexander, who stepped forward and handed a file to the nearest journalist. "This contains proof, bank statements, wire transfers, and email correspondence, detailing the offshore accounts used to siphon money from Grayson Industries." The room erupted into chaos, journalists shouting questions as Emma stepped back from the podium. Alexander placed a reassuring hand on her back, guiding her toward the exit. "You did it," he said quietly as they slipped into a private corridor. "You told your story, and they listened." Emma nodded, her heart racing. "Now we just have to wait and see what they do with it." The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. News outlets exploded with the story, dissecting every piece of evidence and uncovering years of corruption hidden behind the Harrington family's polished image. Melissa's attempts to discredit Emma crumbled under the weight of the undeniable truth. Emma sat on the couch in the penthouse, scrolling through her phone as headline after headline chronicled the scandal. Harrington heiress exposed, financial crimes, rock prominent family. Grayson legacy vindicated as evidence reveals, years of fraud. Emma Grayson speaks out, the fight for justice after decades of deceit. She set the phone down, her chest tightening with a mix of relief and exhaustion. It was over. The truth was finally out, and her father's name had been cleared. Alexander entered the room, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's everywhere," he said, sitting beside her. "Every network, every platform. The Harringtons are finished." Emma exhaled, the weight she'd carried for so long beginning to lift. "I didn't think it would feel like this." "Like what?" Alexander asked gently. "Like I can breathe again," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Alexander placed a hand over hers, his touch warm and steady. "You earned this, Emma. You fought for it." Emma looked at him, her eyes shining. "I couldn't have done it without you." He smiled, his voice soft. "I told you, we're in this together." For the first time in years, Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her. The fight had been long and brutal, but she had emerged stronger, more certain of herself than ever before. She had reclaimed her father's name and her own, proving that even against the odds, the truth could prevail. And as she sat beside Alexander, she realized that in fighting for justice, she had found something else, something worth holding on to. The city seemed quieter in the wake of the scandal, though Emma knew it was only an illusion. Beneath the calm, the pieces of Melissa Harrington's carefully constructed empire were crumbling. News outlets dissected every detail of the evidence, and public opinion turned sharply against her. The woman who once exuded untouchable power was now the subject of scorn and ridicule. Emma sat in the penthouse's living room, the late afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the room. She stared out at the skyline, her tea untouched on the table beside her. The fight was over, but she didn't feel victorious, just tired. "You're brooding again," Alexander said as he entered the room, his voice carrying a note of teasing warmth. He set down his briefcase and loosened his tie before sitting beside her. "You've been staring out that window for an hour." Emma glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Just thinking." "About?" he asked, leaning back and studying her. "Everything," she said with a sigh. "Melissa, my father. What happens now?" "It's strange, spending years wanting something and finally getting it. I thought it would feel different." Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's not the victory that changes everything. It's what you do afterward." Emma tilted her head, meeting his gaze. "And what do I do afterward? How do I move on from this?" He reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "You start living for yourself, Emma. No more running, no more fighting ghosts. You decide what your life looks like." His words settled over her, and for the first time, the future didn't feel like an empty void. "I've spent so long trying to clear my father's name. I don't even know who I am without that fight." "You're Emma Grayson," Alexander said, his voice steady. "A woman who's proven she's stronger than anyone thought. A woman who can build whatever future she wants." She smiled, his words warming her in a way she hadn't expected. "And what about you? What's next for Alexander Reed?" He chuckled, the sound low and genuine. "For now, I'm focused on damage control with my father. The Harrington fallout is shaking up the business world, and he's scrambling to protect his investments. Does he blame you for all this?" Emma asked, her brow furrowing. Alexander shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Probably, but he's not saying it outright." "I think he knows I'd walk away if he pushed too hard." Emma studied him, a hint of admiration in her gaze. "You've changed, you know. When we first met, I didn't think you'd stand up to him like this." "I didn't think I could," Alexander admitted. "But then you came along and suddenly I had something worth fighting for." Emma's breath caught, his words catching her off guard. She looked away, her cheeks warming. "You're good at saying the right thing, you know that." "It's not just the right thing," Alexander said softly, his voice drawing her gaze back to him. "It's the truth." Their eyes met, the moment stretching between them. For weeks, they had been allies, partners in a fight neither of them had asked for, but now, with the battle behind them, something deeper lingered in the air, something neither of them dared to name. The next day, Emma stepped into the bright, airy space of the Grayson Foundation offices, a new chapter taking shape before her eyes. Alexander had helped her secure the funding to launch the foundation, a non-profit dedicated to helping others rebuild after financial ruin. It was her way of honoring her father's legacy while creating something of her own. "Ms. Grayson," a young assistant greeted her, beaming. "The meeting room is ready whenever you are." Emma nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and nervous energy. She still wasn't used to being called by her name in such an official capacity, but she liked the way it felt, like a reclamation of who she was. She entered the meeting room, where a small team of staff and volunteers waited. They greeted her warmly, their excitement palpable. Emma took a deep breath and addressed them. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady. "This foundation isn't just about helping people. It's about giving them the second chances they deserve. My father believed in building something meaningful, and that's what we're here to do. Together, we can make a difference." The room erupted in applause, and Emma felt a surge of confidence. This was her future, something born not from the ashes of her past, but from her own determination to move forward. That evening, Emma returned to the penthouse, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Alexander was in the kitchen, pouring 2 glasses of wine. He looked up as she entered, a smile breaking across his face. "How was the first day?" he asked, handing her a glass. "Exhausting," Emma admitted, though her smile betrayed her satisfaction, but it felt good. Really good. Alexander raised his glass. "To the Grayson Foundation and to you." They clinked glasses, the sound ringing softly in the quiet room. Emma sipped her wine, the warmth spreading through her chest as she leaned against the counter. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said, her voice sincere. "You've been there for me every step of the way." Alexander shook his head. "You would have done it anyway." "I just made sure you didn't have to do it alone." Emma met his gaze, her heart swelling with something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Hope. For the first time, she wasn't defined by her past, by loss or struggle. She was Emma Grayson, and her future was hers to shape. And as Alexander reached for her hand, the promise of that future felt brighter than ever. The morning light spilled into the penthouse, soft and golden, as Emma stood on the balcony, her eyes fixed on the city that had tested her resolve time and time again. She held a steaming mug of coffee in her hands, its warmth grounding her against the chill in the air. Below, the city thrummed with life, cars honking, people rushing, the ever-present hum of ambition and survival. Behind her, Alexander emerged from the penthouse, dressed casually for once, his usual air of polished control replaced with a rare ease. He carried his own mug of coffee and leaned on the railing beside her. "Taking in the view?" he asked, his voice soft. Emma smiled faintly, her gaze still on the horizon. "Something like that. It feels different now, looking at it, like it's not just a battlefield anymore." Alexander sipped his coffee, his eyes tracing the skyline. "That's because it's not. You've carved out your place in it, Emma. It's yours now." She glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "And what about you? Where's your place in all this?" He turned to her, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Wherever I want it to be," Emma chuckled softly, shaking her head. "That's a politician's answer." "No," Alexander said, his tone gentle but serious. "It's the truth. For the first time in my life, I'm not following someone else's script. I'm making my own choices." Emma's heart tightened at his words, the honesty in his voice stirring something deep within her. "And are you happy with the choices you've made?" Alexander's gaze held hers, unflinching. "I am." The weight of his words lingered in the air between them, the unspoken truths they had danced around for weeks, finally pressing against the edges of their carefully constructed walls. Emma looked away first, her cheeks warming as she focused on the city below. "I never thanked you," she said quietly, "for standing by me, for helping me fight for my father's name. I don't think I could have done it without you." Alexander's voice softened. "You've already thanked me, Emma, but if it means that much to you, you're welcome." She turned to him again, her expression conflicted. I don't want you to feel like you've sacrificed too much for me. Your father, your business, all of it." Alexander reached out, gently placing his hand over hers where it rested on the railing. "I didn't sacrifice anything I wasn't ready to lose. What I gained was far more important." Emma's breath caught at the sincerity in his eyes, the way his words wrapped around her like a promise. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them, the distance between them narrowing in ways that felt both terrifying and inevitable. That afternoon, Emma threw herself into her work at the Grayson Foundation. The offices were bustling with energy, the team already working on outreach initiatives and planning their first round of grant distributions. She moved between desks, offering guidance and encouragement, the sense of purpose filling her with a satisfaction she hadn't felt in years. By mid-afternoon, Alexander surprised her by stopping by the office. His presence turned heads, his commanding aura drawing attention even in the midst of the Foundation's activity. Emma met him in the small meeting room they designated as her temporary office. "You're becoming quite the celebrity around here," she teased as he stepped inside. Alexander smirked, leaning casually against the desk. "I wanted to see how things were going, and I figured you might need a break." Emma raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "A break? You don't strike me as the take-a-break kind of person. Maybe I'm turning over a new leaf," he said with a shrug, though his tone held a playful edge. "Besides, I thought you might want to grab a late lunch." Emma hesitated, glancing at the stack of paperwork on her desk. "I don't know, there's so much to do." "Emma?" Alexander interrupted, his voice softer now. "You've earned it. The work will still be here when we get back." She studied him for a moment before relenting, a small smile breaking across her face. "All right, let me grab my coat." They found a quiet corner table at a cozy restaurant a few blocks from the Foundation's office. The conversation was light and, for once, free from the weight of their shared battles. They talked about their favorite childhood memories, places they wanted to visit, and even debated the merits of different classic movies. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in years. The ease between them, a welcome reprieve from the tension that had defined so much of their time together. Alexander, too, seemed more relaxed, his usual air of precision softened by the warmth of the moment. As the meal wound down, Emma set her fork down and looked at him, her expression turning serious. "Alexander, can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Why did you stay?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Through everything, my past, my fears, the fight with Melissa, why didn't you walk away?" Alexander's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "Because I saw something in you, Emma. Strength, resilience, a determination to do what's right, even when it's hard. You reminded me of what I wanted for myself, what I'd forgotten I could have. And somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the fight. It started being about you." Her breath hitched, her chest tightening at the raw honesty in his words. She didn't know what to say, how to respond to the depth of what he'd just shared. But as she looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest, she realized she didn't need words. Instead, she reached across the table, her hand finding his. The touch was simple, but it carried everything she couldn't say. Gratitude, affection, and the stirrings of something she hadn't let herself believe in for years. And as Alexander's fingers closed gently around hers, Emma felt a quiet certainty settle over her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The week unfolded with a sense of calm that Emma hadn't known in years. The chaos of the past months had settled, leaving her with a sense of clarity and purpose she had thought impossible. The Grayson Foundation was thriving, its mission resonating with those who needed it most. The outpouring of support had been overwhelming, with donations and partnerships pouring in, a testament to her father's legacy and the truth she had fought so hard to reveal. Emma spent her days immersed in the Foundation's work, meeting with staff, visiting community projects, and planning the next phase of their outreach. But in the quieter moments, on her walks home, or as she prepared for bed, her thoughts often drifted to Alexander. Their bond had deepened in ways she hadn't expected. The ease of their partnership in the fight against Melissa had transformed into something unspoken, but undeniably real. She found herself seeking his advice, his presence, his perspective, and more than once she had caught herself wondering if this connection between them was something more than she dared to name. One evening, Alexander invited her to dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. The setting was elegant but understated, the kind of place that felt intimate despite its sophistication. As they stepped out onto the terrace, the city stretched out before them, its lights glittering like a sea of stars. "This is beautiful," Emma said, her voice soft as she took in the view. Alexander smiled, guiding her to their table. "I thought you'd like it. You've been working so hard. I figured you deserved a little break." She laughed lightly, shaking her head. "You're starting to sound like me." "I thought you didn't believe in breaks." He chuckled, the sound low and warm. "You've been a bad influence." As they sat down, the conversation flowed easily, a mix of light-hearted banter and deeper reflections on the journeys they had taken to get here. Emma found herself relaxing in his presence, the weight of the world slipping away as she laughed at one of his rare but perfectly timed jokes. When the waiter brought their desserts, Emma's a delicate lemon tart and Alexander's a molten chocolate cake, she couldn't resist teasing him. "I wouldn't have pegged you as a chocolate guy," she said with a grin. He shrugged, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "It's a guilty pleasure. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my image." They laughed, the sound carrying on the cool night air, but as the laughter faded, a comfortable silence settled between them. Alexander leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Emma," he began, his voice quieter now, "there's something I've been meaning to say." She looked up from her tart, her heart skipping a beat at the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment, as though weighing his words. "When we started all of this, the deal, the fight with Melissa, I didn't expect to feel what I do now." Emma's breath caught, her chest tightening as his words sank in. "You've changed me," Alexander continued, his eyes meeting hers. "You reminded me what it means to fight for something real, to stand up for what matters. And somewhere along the way, you became more than just my partner in this. You became someone I care about deeply." Her cheeks warmed, her heart pounding as she searched his gaze. "Alexander, I know this isn't what either of us planned," he said, his voice steady but vulnerable. "But I don't want to pretend anymore. I care about you, Emma. And if there's a chance you feel the same way—" Emma set down her fork, her hands trembling slightly as she reached across the table to take his. The sincerity in his eyes, the raw honesty in his words, left her no room for doubt. "I do," she said softly. "I didn't think I could trust anyone again, not after everything. But you've been there for me, even when I didn't think I deserved it. And somewhere along the way, you became more than just someone I needed. You became someone I want." Alexander's lips curved into a smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "Then I guess that makes two of us." They sat there, hands entwined, the city sprawling before them as the distance that had once separated them vanished completely. In the days that followed, their relationship blossomed quietly but undeniably. They found moments between the demands of their lives to steal away, long walks in the park, late-night conversations on the penthouse balcony, and shared laughter over takeout dinners. One afternoon, as they sat together in the Grayson Foundation offices, Alexander glanced at her, his expression soft. "You're incredible, you know that." Emma looked up from her laptop, raising an eyebrow. "What brought that on?" He shrugged, leaning closer. "Just watching you build something meaningful. You've taken your father's legacy and turned it into something extraordinary." Her smile was shy but genuine. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You could have," Alexander said firmly, "but I'm glad you let me be part of it." Emma reached for his hand, the gesture simple but filled with meaning. "You're not just part of it, Alexander. You're part of my life now." His fingers tightened around hers, his gaze warm and unwavering. "And you're part of mine." As the city bustled outside the office windows, Emma felt a quiet certainty settle over her. The path she had walked to get here had been long and painful, but it had brought her to this moment, to this man, and to a future she was finally ready to embrace. And for the first time in years, Emma Grayson wasn't looking back. She was looking forward, toward a horizon filled with hope, purpose, and love. The morning air in Manhattan carried a hint of spring, the promise of renewal evident in the budding trees lining the streets. Emma stepped into the Grayson Foundation's office, greeted by the hum of activity. Her team was abuzz with energy, preparing for their first major gala, an event meant to celebrate the foundation's success and solidify its standing among the city's elite philanthropists. As she walked through the office, Emma couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. This was her creation, born from the ashes of her father's name and fueled by her determination to make something good out of all that had happened. It was no longer about clearing his name or seeking justice. It was about building something lasting. In the conference room, the team had assembled for a final planning meeting. Emma took her seat at the head of the table, her confidence growing with each passing day. She scanned the faces around her, noting the mix of enthusiasm and nervous energy. "All right," she began, her tone steady. "Let's go over everything one last time. This gala is our chance to show the world what we've accomplished and what we're capable of. It's not just about raising funds. It's about making connections and sharing our vision." Her assistant, a sharp and efficient woman named Claire, began outlining the evening's schedule. The guest list included influential figures from across the city, business leaders, politicians, and even a few celebrities. Alexander had been instrumental in securing many of the attendees, his network proving invaluable. As the meeting wrapped up, Emma felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Alexander, his presence a steadying force as always. "You're ready for this," he said simply, his eyes holding hers. "I think I am," Emma replied, her smile soft. "It's just a lot." He nodded, his voice low and reassuring. "It's supposed to be. But you've faced bigger challenges than this, and you've come out stronger every time." Emma let his words settle over her, their truth warming her in a way she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Always," Alexander replied, his lips curving into a small smile. That evening, the gala was a dazzling affair. The venue, a historic ballroom draped in soft golds and whites, was filled with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Emma stood near the entrance, greeting guests with a calm confidence that belied the nervous flutter in her chest. Alexander stood at her side, his presence both grounding and magnetic. He exuded the kind of quiet authority that made people take notice, and Emma couldn't help but feel grateful for his unwavering support. As the evening unfolded, Emma moved through the crowd, speaking passionately about the Foundation's mission and the impact it had already made. She found herself surrounded by allies, people who believed in what she was building and wanted to help. Near the bar, she caught sight of Melissa Harrington. The former socialite's presence at the gala was unexpected, though perhaps inevitable. Melissa's once pristine reputation had been shattered by the scandal Emma had exposed, and she now moved through the room like a shadow of her former self. Emma approached cautiously, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Melissa turned, her expression neutral but guarded. "Melissa," Emma said, her voice even. "I didn't expect to see you here." Melissa's lips twitched into a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I couldn't resist. It seems you've made quite the name for yourself." Emma studied her for a moment before responding. "This isn't about me. It's about the work we're doing." "Of course," Melissa said, her tone tinged with bitterness. "You've won, Emma. You've cleared your father's name and built something real." "Congratulations," Emma frowned, unsure how to interpret Melissa's words. "This was never about winning, Melissa. It was about the truth." Melissa's smile faltered, and for the first time, Emma saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "Truth," she repeated softly. "It's funny how easily it can destroy everything." Emma hesitated before speaking. "Maybe it's not about what's been destroyed. Maybe it's about what you build afterward." Melissa's gaze lingered on her for a long moment before she nodded, a faint, almost wistful smile crossing her face. "Maybe." As Melissa turned and walked away, Emma felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, and a touch of compassion. The woman who had once been her greatest adversary now seemed more human, her sharp edges dulled by loss. The highlight of the evening was Emma's speech. Standing on the stage, she looked out at the crowd, her heart swelling with a mix of nerves and pride. "When I started the Grayson Foundation," she began, her voice steady, "it wasn't just about honoring my father's legacy. It was about giving people the same chance he always gave others, a chance to rebuild, to thrive, to believe in themselves again." The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. "This foundation is proof that even in the face of adversity, we can create something meaningful. It's a reminder that our pasts don't define us. What we do with them does." The applause that followed was thunderous, and as Emma stepped down from the stage, she felt a hand slip into hers. Alexander stood beside her, his smile warm and proud. "You were incredible," he said, his voice low. Emma looked up at him, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You didn't need me," he replied, "but I'm glad I was here." As the evening drew to a close, Emma found herself standing with Alexander on the terrace, the city's lights twinkling below. She leaned against the railing, her hand still in his. "What's next?" she asked softly, her gaze on the horizon. Alexander squeezed her hand gently. "Whatever you want, Emma. The future's yours." She turned to him, her smile luminous. "Ours," she corrected, and for the first time, Emma felt a true sense of peace, a life rebuilt not just from struggle, but from love, purpose, and the promise of a future she could finally embrace. The days following the gala felt like a turning point. Emma found herself busier than ever, juggling the demands of the Grayson Foundation with the burgeoning attention her speech had garnered. Invitations for interviews poured in, and new partnerships began to take shape. For the first time, Emma felt not just like the steward of her father's legacy, but the architect of her own. But amidst the whirlwind of success, her relationship with Alexander became her anchor. Their bond, forged in fire, had grown into something deeper, an unspoken understanding, a steady presence that neither of them took for granted. One evening, Emma returned to the penthouse after a particularly grueling day. The office had been a hive of activity, and though she thrived in the challenge, she was exhausted. As she stepped through the door, the warm scent of something savory greeted her. "Alexander," she called, slipping off her heels. "In the kitchen," he replied. She walked in to find him standing at the stove, stirring a pot of what looked like pasta sauce. He was dressed casually in a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and the sight of him like this, a far cry from his usual polished demeanor, made her heart tighten. "You're cooking?" she asked, a teasing smile playing on her lips. He glanced at her, his expression mock serious. "Don't look so surprised. I'm not completely hopeless." She leaned against the counter, watching him with a mix of amusement and affection. "I'll believe it when I taste it," Alexander chuckled, handing her a spoon. "Try it." Emma hesitated, then dipped the spoon into the sauce and tasted it. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Okay, this is actually good." "Actually? You doubted me?" he asked, feigning offense. "Always," she said with a grin. He laughed, the sound low and warm, and for a moment the weight of their shared struggles seemed to lift. It was just the two of them, in a quiet kitchen, finding joy in the simplest of moments. After dinner, they sat on the couch, a bottle of wine between them. The city lights twinkled outside the windows, casting a soft glow over the room. Emma curled her legs beneath her, her glass resting on the arm of the couch as she looked at Alexander. "You know," she said, her voice thoughtful, "when this all started, I didn't think we'd end up here." He raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a small smile. "Here as in this," she said, gesturing between them. "You and me. I thought we were just pretending." "So did I," he admitted, his voice quieter now. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like an act. Emma studied him, her heart racing. "When?" He looked at her, his gaze steady. "I don't know exactly. Maybe it was the first time I saw you stand up to my father, or when you refused to back down, no matter how hard it got. Maybe it was every time you reminded me what it means to fight for something real." Her breath caught, the depth of his words sinking in. "Alexander, you don't have to say anything," he said gently. "I just needed you to know." Emma set her glass down and reached for his hand, her fingers brushing his. "I do know. And I feel the same way." His smile softened, and he leaned closer, his voice low. "Then maybe it's time we stop holding back." She didn't hesitate this time. As their lips met, the weight of everything they'd been through melted away. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, unspoken but undeniable. In the weeks that followed, their relationship flourished, no longer hidden in the shadows of necessity or pretense. They navigated their busy lives with a newfound ease, finding ways to support each other without losing themselves in the process. One afternoon, Alexander surprised Emma with a visit to the Grayson Foundation office. He arrived unannounced, carrying a small bouquet of sunflowers. Emma, caught off guard but delighted, laughed as he handed them to her. "Sunflowers?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not exactly what I expected." "They reminded me of you," he said simply. "Bright, resilient, and impossible to ignore." Her cheeks warmed as she placed the bouquet on her desk. "You're surprisingly poetic for a businessman." "I have my moments," he replied with a grin. Their light-hearted banter was interrupted by Claire, who poked her head into the office. "Sorry to interrupt, but Emma, there's someone here asking to see you. A young woman says her name is Lily." Emma's smile faltered, recognition flashing in her eyes. "Lily? As in—" "Lily Carter," Claire confirmed. Alexander's expression darkened at the mention of the name. "Daniel's sister." Emma nodded, her heart sinking. "I'll handle it." Claire left, and Emma glanced at Alexander. "You don't have to stay." "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. When Lily entered, she looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was younger than Emma remembered, her face soft and unguarded in a way that reminded Emma of herself before everything had fallen apart. "Emma," Lily said, her voice tentative, I didn't know where else to go." Emma gestured for her to sit. "What's going on?" "It's Daniel," Lily said, her voice trembling. "He's in trouble, and I think he's going to try to drag you into it." Emma exchanged a look with Alexander, her chest tightening. "What kind of trouble?" Lily hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Financial trouble. He's been using your story, twisting it to make himself look like a victim. He's trying to pull investors into some kind of scheme." Emma's jaw tightened, anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "And he's using my name to do it." Lily nodded, her eyes pleading. "I didn't know who else to warn." "Please, you have to stop him." Alexander placed a steadying hand on Emma's shoulder. "We will." Emma met Lily's gaze, her voice firm. "Thank you for coming to me. We'll make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else." As Lily left, Emma turned to Alexander, her resolve hardening. "It's not over yet, is it?" "No," Alexander said, his voice steady. "But this time, we're ready." And as they stood together in the quiet of the office, Emma knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. They were a team now, stronger together than they had ever been apart. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.